I remember the day clearly, even though it was years ago now. The sun was high and bright in the sky, the kind of perfect day that feels like it was made for being outdoors. I had planned the hike for weeks, careful to pick a trail that was challenging but doable, one that promised beautiful views and fresh air. I needed that hike, a break from everything. Life had been tense and exhausting, and being alone in the woods sounded like the best way to clear my mind. The trailhead was just off a quiet country road, hidden behind a small parking lot with just a few other cars. It was early morning, maybe 8 a.m., and the air was still cool but warming fast. I took a deep breath before stepping onto the dirt path, feeling the crunch of gravel under my boots and the soft rustle of leaves above me. The forest was alive with sounds, birds calling, leaves whispering in the breeze, the distant buzz of insects. The trail wound upward through a mix of pine and hardwood trees. I kept a steady pace, carrying a backpack with water, snacks, a first aid kit, and a map tucked into the side pocket. I always bring a map. The phone had some battery, but I wasn't counting on it. This area was remote enough that service might be patchy. The first few miles passed without incident. The sunlight filtered through the branches in dappled patches, and I felt my worries start to fade. There was something calming about the quiet, the rhythm of my footsteps, and the simple act of moving through the trees. I stopped now and then to look around or take a sip of water, noticing how the shadows shifted as the sun climbed. Around the third mile, the trail started to change. It became narrower, steeper, and rockier. The trees grew denser, their trunks thicker and older. Moss covered the stones and fallen logs, and the air felt cooler and heavier. I noticed fewer birds now. The forest was quieter except for the sound of my boots on the rough ground. I slowed down to watch my footing. The trail was less maintained here. Branches blocked parts of the path, and the rocks were uneven. I had to be careful not to twist an ankle. The incline made my legs ache, but I welcomed the challenge. Reaching the top meant the view would be worth it. About 4 miles in, I reached a fork in the trail. The map said the left path would lead me to the summit overlook in about a mile, while the right loop would circle around and come back to the main trail. I took the left, eager to see the view and take a break. That part of the trail was steeper and rockier still. The trees grew even closer together, their branches forming a tight canopy above, dimming the light. I could feel a slight chill in the air. The ground underfoot was damp and soft, probably from last night's rain. I pushed on carefully. After about half a mile, I noticed something strange. The trail markings had stopped. Usually, there would be blazes on trees or painted marks to guide hikers, but here there was nothing. I paused, pulling out the map and studying it closely. According to the map, the trail should have continued straight ahead for another half mile before opening up to the overlook. I scanned the trees and the ground, looking for any sign of the path. The dirt looked undisturbed, almost like no one had walked here in a long time. A creeping feeling of unease settled in my chest. I told myself I was probably just missing the markings. I stepped forward, trying to pick a path through the underbrush. Branches scratched at my arms and face, and the air felt thick and heavy. After about 10 minutes of moving slowly, I realized I was no longer sure which way was the trail. The trees looked the same all around me, dense and tangled. The ground was uneven and covered with leaves and broken branches. I tried to backtrack, but the way I had come was no easier to find now. Panic started to rise. I took out my phone to check GPS, but there was no signal. The battery was already low from the morning, and I hadn't turned it on earlier. I swallowed hard and tried to calm down. I sat on a fallen log, took a few deep breaths, and tried to think logically. The sun was still high but would be setting in a few hours. I could try to backtrack along the main trail, but without knowing exactly where I was, it was risky. I pulled out the map again and tried to orient myself. There was a small creek marked nearby, and I thought I could hear the faint sound of running water in the distance. I figured if I could find the creek, I could follow it downhill and hopefully find the main trail or the road. I stood up and started moving carefully toward the sound. The brush was thick, and I had to duck under low branches and step over roots. My heart was pounding. The forest felt alive in a way it hadn't before. Shadows moved at the edge of my vision, and every snap of a twig or rustle made me jump. After about 20 minutes, I reached the creek. It was a narrow stream, water clear but cold and fast-moving. I felt relief wash over me. I followed the creek downstream, walking slowly and watching my footing. As I walked, the forest began to thin out slightly, and the ground leveled. I hoped this meant I was getting closer to civilization. But as the minutes passed, I realized something else. The forest was eerily silent. The birds and insects had stopped making noise. Even the creek sounded quieter. I tried to shake the feeling, but my skin prickled. Something felt off. The trees seemed to close in again, their branches stretching toward the sky like claws. The light dimmed as clouds began to roll in, blotting out the sun. I pushed onward, heart pounding. The path alongside the creek was muddy and slippery. At one point, I slipped and almost fell into the water. I caught myself, but the wetness of my clothes added to the growing discomfort. I told myself to stay calm. The creek had to lead somewhere. If I kept following it, I would find the trail or road soon. Hours passed, or maybe just what felt like hours. I lost track of time. The sky darkened, the forest growing colder. I pulled out my jacket and wrapped it tightly. The forest was no longer just quiet. It was oppressive. Every shadow felt deeper, every noise sharper. Then, I heard it. A distant noise that made my blood run cold. At first, it was faint, like a low growl or grunt. I froze, straining to listen. The sound grew louder and closer, mixed with the crunching of leaves and branches. I stopped moving and scanned the trees. I couldn't see anything, but I knew something was out there, something big. I had read about bears and mountain lions in the area, but I had never encountered one. My mind raced with every survival tip I had read. Make yourself big, don't run, make noise. I grabbed a sturdy stick from the ground and held it in front of me. I tried to sound firm, stomping on the ground and shouting, hoping to scare away whatever was there. The noise stopped. Silence fell again, thick and heavy. I waited, every muscle tense. After a long time, I decided to move slowly away from the creek, trying to find higher ground or a better vantage point. I climbed up a small rise covered in bushes and looked around. In the fading light, I could make out shapes moving among the trees, shadows shifting just beyond clear view. My heart hammered. I stepped back and twisted my ankle on a hidden root. The sharp pain made me sit down immediately. My ankle was swollen and throbbing. I realized with a sinking feeling that walking long distances would be impossible. The cold deepened as night fell. I knew I couldn't stay out here all night, injured and alone. I tried to think. My phone still had a little battery, so I turned on the flashlight. It illuminated a small area around me, but the darkness beyond was absolute. I gathered some dry leaves and sticks and managed to make a small fire with my lighter. The warmth felt good, but I was shivering anyway, tired and scared. I stayed awake, listening to the forest sounds, trying to ignore the noises that might have been animals or something else. I thought about what I would do in the morning. After a few hours, I finally fell into a restless sleep, waking at first light. When I opened my eyes, the forest looked different, softer, less threatening. I carefully tested my ankle. It was painful but not broken. I could put some weight on it. I decided to follow the sun's direction and the slope downhill, hoping to find a road or trail. It took hours of slow, painful walking, resting often. The forest gradually thinned, and I spotted power lines in the distance. I felt a surge of hope and moved toward them. Eventually, I heard the sound of a vehicle and saw a small paved road below. I managed to get down to it and flagged down a passing car. The driver called for help, and I was taken to the nearest town. The rescue team told me that the area I had been in was known for having unmarked, confusing side trails and dense underbrush. Other hikers had gotten lost there before. The wildlife was real and could be dangerous, especially at night. Looking back, I realized how lucky I had been. I was prepared with gear and supplies, and I stayed calm enough to survive. I never went back to that part of the forest, but the memory stayed with me. A reminder of how quickly nature can turn from beautiful to terrifying when you lose your way. The experience changed how I hike. I started carrying better maps. I still remember that hike like it was yesterday, even though it happened over a year ago. It was one of those trips I planned on my own. No company, just me and the trail. I needed that kind of solitude, a break from the noise and the constant buzz of the city. The trail was supposed to be straightforward, a well-known path through some decent wilderness not far from where I live. I told myself I was prepared. I'd done plenty of hikes before, nothing out of the ordinary. But that day changed everything about how I think of being alone in the woods. I left early in the morning, just after dawn. The air was cool and fresh, the kind that makes you feel alive. The trailhead was easy to find, just a small gravel parking lot beside a quiet back road. I strapped my pack tight and set off, boots crunching on the dirt path. The sun was just rising, casting long shadows through the tall pine trees. The smell of damp earth and pine needles filled the air. Birds were waking up, singing their early songs. At first, everything felt peaceful, normal, just the way I wanted it. The trail followed an old logging road that twisted through the forest, occasionally crossing little streams that sparkled in the sunlight. I stopped every so often to drink water and snap a few pictures, but mostly I kept walking, focused on the rhythm of my steps and the quiet sounds of the woods. About 3 miles in, the path started to narrow, and the trees grew thicker. The canopy overhead closed in so much that the sunlight barely reached the forest floor. The air cooled again, damp and heavy with moss and fallen leaves. It was the kind of place that felt untouched, almost sacred in a way. I was making good time and feeling great, confident in my route and gear. I had my map and compass in my pack, a fully charged phone, plenty of water, snacks, and a basic first aid kit. I wasn't worried. I was just looking forward to reaching the little clearing where I planned to stop for lunch and rest before turning back. About an hour later, I noticed something strange. The trail signs started to look old and worn, some missing altogether. The trail markers I was used to seeing on trees or posts disappeared, and the path looked less used. The dirt was soft in places, as if no one had walked here in a while. I checked my map, confirming I was still on the right track, but unease crept in. The woods grew quieter, too quiet. No birds, no rustling animals, just an eerie stillness. I kept going, telling myself it was just part of the wilderness, that sometimes nature is silent. But after another half hour, I realized something else. The path was splitting off in 2 directions, with no clear sign to tell which one was correct. I looked around for markers, but there was nothing. The trees were thick and close, the trail forks disappearing into shadowy woods. I sat down on a fallen log, pulling out my compass and map again. According to the map, the trail should curve to the right and eventually open up into a meadow with a small pond. But the right fork looked overgrown, barely a path at all. The left fork was clearer but led deeper into the thick forest. I felt the weight of the decision settling on me. For a long time, I debated which way to go. I thought about turning back, but something inside me wanted to push forward, to prove I could handle it. I picked the right fork, the less clear one, reasoning that it must be the original trail, and the other was an old logging path no longer in use. The bushes scraped against my legs as I pushed through, the ground soft and uneven beneath my boots. Minutes later, the overgrowth got worse. Branches tugged at my sleeves, and I had to duck under low-hanging limbs. The path vanished almost completely, replaced by thick ferns and tangled vines. I paused several times to catch my breath and check the map. The sun was starting to climb higher, but the dense canopy above kept the forest dim and shadowed. Suddenly, I heard a cracking sound behind me, a branch breaking. I whipped around, heart pounding, but saw nothing except the quiet trees. The air felt heavier, and the forest seemed to close in tighter. I told myself it was probably a deer or some other animal moving through the brush. I kept walking, quicker now, trying to find that meadow. But then the path stopped entirely. The underbrush became impenetrable. I looked around in frustration, realizing I had no idea where I was. I couldn't see the trail anymore. My phone still had signal, so I pulled it out to check my location. The GPS showed I was off the mapped trail, lost somewhere in this thick forest. I sat down on a rock, feeling the first wave of real fear. I wasn't worried about wild animals, not really. What scared me most was being alone, lost, with no way out. My water was getting low. The sun was past its peak, and shadows stretched long again. I knew I had to stay calm and think. I tried to backtrack, but every direction looked the same. Tall trees, dense bushes, uneven ground. I kept my compass out and tried to follow it toward the trailhead, but the forest was confusing, with ridges and dips that made it hard to tell which way was which. Every so often, I'd trip over roots or slip on wet leaves. Hours passed. My legs ached, my mouth was dry, and my pack felt heavy. I stopped to eat some snacks but barely had an appetite. I started to worry about how late it was getting. The sky was turning pale orange through the branches. I tried to call someone on my phone, but no one answered. I left a message telling them where I was and to call the park rangers if I didn't come back. The cold started settling in. I hadn't packed for an overnight stay because I thought I'd be back by now. Panic was rising, and my hands shook as I tried to keep my compass steady. Then I heard it, footsteps, crunching in the leaves not far away. My heart jumped. I froze, listening hard, but the sound stopped. I called out softly, but no reply. I thought about moving toward the sound, but something told me not to. Could be a hunter or someone else on the trail, but I didn't want to risk it. I huddled against a tree trunk, trying to make myself small and stay hidden in case whoever it was came closer. My mind raced with worst-case scenarios. Darkness fell fast. The woods became a maze of black shapes and sounds. I wrapped myself in my jacket, trying to stay warm and quiet. The noises of the forest changed. Distant owls hooting, twigs snapping here and there. Every little sound made me jump. I realized I hadn't marked my trail at all, so I had no idea which way to go in the dark. I thought about staying put until morning, but the cold was biting, and I had no shelter. I decided to try and find a safe place to rest for a few hours, maybe a spot sheltered by thick trees or rocks. I moved slowly, careful not to trip or make noise. After some time, I found a small hollow between two fallen logs that blocked the wind. I sat down, curling up as best I could. My thoughts were a jumble. What if no one came looking for me? What if I couldn't find the trail tomorrow? I tried to focus on breathing slow and deep to calm the rising panic. Sleep came fitfully, broken by strange sounds and cold. When dawn finally came, the woods looked different in the pale morning light. I felt a flicker of hope and pushed myself up. I checked my phone again. The battery was almost dead, and the GPS signal was weak. I decided I had to try and find the trail on my own. I studied the map again and thought about the landmarks I had passed. I remembered crossing a stream earlier. If I could find water, maybe I could follow it downstream to the trailhead or a road. I set off, moving carefully through the trees. I listened for the sound of running water, and after an hour or so, I heard it, a faint rush of a stream. I followed the sound downhill, pushing through brush and stepping over roots. The stream was narrow and cold, but it was something solid to follow. By midday, I stumbled out of the dense forest onto a small dirt road. Relief flooded through me. The road was old but clearly used sometimes. I followed it downhill, and after a few miles, I saw a park ranger truck parked near the trailhead. I called out, and the ranger came over quickly. I told him where I had been, how I'd gotten lost, and that I hadn't marked the trail. He shook his head and said it happened sometimes to hikers who didn't prepare enough or lost focus. They organized a search party after I didn't come back the night before. I felt embarrassed but also grateful. The ranger gave me some water and a ride back to my car. I was tired, sore, and shaken, but I was safe. That hike taught me a lot about respect. Respect for nature, for preparation, and for my own limits. I realized that being alone in the wilderness isn't just about physical endurance, but about staying calm, making smart choices, and understanding the risks. Since then, I never take a trail for granted. I mark my path, keep my phone fully charged, carry extra supplies, and always tell someone my plans. The woods are beautiful, but they're also unforgiving. That day reminded me how quickly things can turn from peaceful to dangerous. I still hike, but with a new kind of caution and respect. And every time I'm out there, I remember that feeling, lost, scared, but determined to find my way back home. I never thought I would get lost hiking. I had always been someone who loved the outdoors, who enjoyed the calm and quiet of the woods, the fresh smell of pine needles, the crunch of dirt and leaves underfoot, the clear blue sky above, and the gentle breeze rustling through the branches. Hiking was supposed to be peaceful, relaxing, a way to get away from the noise of the world and think. But that day, it wasn't peaceful at all. It was the worst day I had ever spent outside. It was a day I will never forget. Started out like any other hike I'd been on. I woke up early in the morning, before the sun was even fully out, to get ready. I packed my backpack carefully, water bottles, snacks, a small first aid kit, a map, compass, a flashlight, extra socks, and a lightweight jacket in case the weather turned cold. I didn't have a phone signal in the area I was going to, but I made sure someone knew where I was going and when I planned to be back. I felt prepared. The trail I chose was in a national forest that was about 2 hours from where I lived. It was popular but not crowded, and I liked that. The trailhead was easy to find, with a small parking lot and a wooden sign marking the start. It was a cool, crisp morning with a clear sky, perfect for hiking. The sun was just starting to rise, casting long shadows and bathing the forest in soft orange light. As I started walking, the air smelled fresh and earthy. The sounds of birds waking up filled the air. I took deep breaths, enjoying the feeling of being alone with nature. The trail was well marked at first, with clear signs and painted markers on the trees. The path was soft under my feet, covered with fallen leaves and pine needles. I passed by small streams and patches of wildflowers. Everything felt right. After about 2 hours, I reached a fork in the trail. The map showed both paths looping back to the parking lot, but one was longer and more challenging, and the other was shorter and easier. I decided to take the longer, harder trail to make the hike more interesting. The trail narrowed, and the trees grew taller and denser. The sunlight barely reached the forest floor now. The air felt cooler, damper. At first, the trail markers were still there, but after a while, they became fewer and farther between. I didn't worry much. I had the map and the compass, and I was confident I could find my way. The trail twisted and turned, going up hills and down into small valleys. I passed fallen logs covered with moss and small caves where I could see little animals darting inside. After several hours, I realized I hadn't seen any markers for a long time. The path was becoming harder to follow. The dirt was soft and muddy in places from recent rain, and some areas were covered with thick roots and loose rocks. I stopped to check the map. According to it, I was still on the right trail, but I could feel the trail wasn't as clear as before. That's when I made my first mistake. I decided to take a shortcut. I thought if I cut across a small ridge, I could save some time and reach the trail again further down. It seemed simple enough. The ridge wasn't very high, and I could see through the trees a little bit of the valley below. I went off the trail, stepping carefully over bushes and rocks. The ground was uneven, and some parts were slippery with wet leaves. As I moved through the underbrush, I kept glancing at the map and compass to keep my direction. But soon the trees became thicker and the ground steeper. I had to grab onto branches and tree trunks to keep from falling. The sunlight dimmed as the branches grew closer overhead. My heart started to beat faster, not from the effort, but from a growing sense of unease. Then I heard it, a low, distant sound like something moving through the bushes. It wasn't a bird or an animal I recognized. It was slow, deliberate. I stopped moving and listened carefully. The sound stopped. I waited for a while, but nothing else came. I shook my head and told myself it was just the wind or maybe a deer. I tried to keep calm. I kept moving up the ridge, focusing on the compass and trying to find the trail again. But then the ground gave way under my foot, and I slipped down a small slope covered in loose rocks and mud. I fell hard onto my side, scraping my arm and twisting my ankle badly. Pain shot through my foot. I tried to stand, but my ankle was swollen and unstable. I realized then how badly I had underestimated the terrain. I sat down to catch my breath and look around. The ridge was narrow with steep drops on either side. There was no clear path visible from where I was. The forest was silent again except for the sound of my heavy breathing and the occasional rustle of leaves. I checked my ankle carefully. It was swollen and tender but not broken, I hoped. I tested putting some weight on it, and while painful, I could stand if I was careful. I decided I would have to hobble back the way I came, back down the ridge. I was alone, hurt, and in thick forest with no clear trail. The sun was getting lower now, filtering through the trees in golden shafts. I tried to stay calm. I told myself to think clearly. I took out my water and had a few sips. I needed to keep hydrated. My stomach growled. I hadn't eaten in a while. I pulled out some granola bars and ate slowly. The food gave me some energy. I started down the ridge, moving slowly and using my hands for balance. The rocks shifted under my fingers and boots. I had to stop often to rest and catch my breath. The forest seemed to close in tighter, and the shadows grew longer. The air cooled quickly as the sun dropped. Suddenly, the distant sound I heard before came again. This time it was closer, louder. It was the sound of footsteps, slow and heavy, moving through the underbrush. My heart jumped. I froze, listening. The sound came from the direction I wanted to go, the way back to the trail. I didn't know what it was, but it was too big to be a deer or small animal. It was something larger, and it was getting closer. I debated whether to call out or make noise to scare it away, but I was afraid to attract attention. I quietly pulled my jacket tighter around me and moved to the side, trying to stay hidden behind a thick tree trunk. My breath was shallow and fast. My body trembled with fear. The footsteps stopped nearby, maybe 20 feet from me. I could hear the sound of branches breaking, leaves crunching. Then silence. I waited, barely daring to breathe. After a few minutes, I decided to keep moving carefully and slowly. I kept my eyes on the spot where the footsteps had stopped, but I didn't see anything. I moved a few steps, then stopped again. The forest seemed empty, but I felt watched. The feeling of being hunted, of something unseen stalking me, was overwhelming. I moved faster now, limping badly but desperate to get back to the trail. I tried to stay on my compass heading, but the thick forest made it hard to keep direction. The sun had almost set. Twilight filled the forest with dim blue light. Then I stumbled into a clearing. It was small, surrounded by tall trees, but in the center was an old, rusty signpost. The wood was cracked and faded, but I could make out the word trail carved into it. Relief flooded me. I had found the trail again. I limped over to the trail and rested against a tree. I looked back toward the ridge I had come from. The shadows in that direction seemed deeper now, almost black. The footsteps were gone, but the memory of them stayed with me. I took out my flashlight and switched it on. The beam cut through the growing darkness. I started walking along the trail, careful with my ankle. The path was clearer here, and I recognized it from earlier in the day. As I walked, I tried to think about how I would get out before dark. I estimated it would take me at least an hour, maybe more, with my injured ankle. I drank more water and ate a little more to keep my energy up. The forest was quiet now, except for the sound of my footsteps and the occasional snap of a twig. I kept my flashlight pointing ahead, watching for roots and rocks. Every shadow seemed to move. Every rustle made me jump. I saw a few birds roosting for the night and some small animals scurrying away. The sky above was darkening to deep navy, and stars began to appear. I was tired, sore, and scared, but I kept moving. After what felt like hours, I finally saw the faint glow of the parking lot lights through the trees. My heart lifted. I was almost out. I quickened my pace, trying not to put too much pressure on my ankle. When I reached the parking lot, I sank down on a bench, exhausted. I pulled out my phone, and thankfully, I had a signal again. I called the person who knew my plans and told them I was okay but injured and delayed. They promised to come pick me up. As I waited, I thought about what had happened. The forest was beautiful and peaceful, but it could also be dangerous. I had taken a shortcut, underestimated the terrain, and gotten hurt. The footsteps I heard, maybe a wild animal or maybe a lost hiker like me, had scared me more than anything. The fear wasn't from ghosts or monsters, but from real things. Being lost, injured, alone, and unsure if I would find my way back. When my ride arrived, I was relieved beyond words. I leaned on them as I got into the car. I looked back at the dark forest. I had been looking forward to this hike for weeks. It was the kind of trip I needed, a break from everything, away from the constant noise and pressure of my day-to-day life. I work in an office where the hours are long and the work never really ends. The city gets inside your head after a while, and the crowds wear you down. I wanted something raw, something real, something that would remind me I was still alive. So, I planned a solo hike in a forest that was not too far from where I lived but far enough that it felt remote. It was a place people talked about as wild, a bit untouched. Not a tourist trail or well-marked park, just a forest. I packed my bag the night before. A simple pack, a tent, a sleeping bag, some dried food, water, a small first aid kit, a map, and a compass. I didn't want to carry too much weight. I wanted to be light on my feet. I made sure my phone was fully charged, though I knew reception would be spotty. I had also downloaded offline maps, just in case. I left a note with my sister telling her where I was headed and when I expected to be back. She didn't need to know I was doing it alone, but I wanted someone to know where I was. I got an early start. The sun was just coming up as I drove to the trailhead. It was a small dirt parking lot. Not more than a dozen cars could fit there. I was surprised to see 1 or 2 cars already parked. I assumed those were other hikers who started even earlier. I slipped on my boots, slung my pack over my shoulders, and set off down the trail. The first part of the hike was easy. The trail was clear, wide enough for a person or two to walk side by side. The ground was soft, covered in pine needles. The forest was quiet except for the occasional bird or rustle of a squirrel. The trees were tall, mostly pine and fir, and the sunlight filtered through their branches in long golden beams. I breathed deeply and felt a lightness in my chest I hadn't felt in a long time. As I walked, I kept an eye on the map. The trail was supposed to loop around a ridge and then follow a stream down to a small lake. From the lake, I would camp overnight before heading back the next day. The plan was simple, but it felt good. Simple plans were good when you needed to clear your mind. After about 2 hours of steady walking, the trail started to narrow. The well-marked path began to fade, replaced by faint dirt tracks and patches of trampled grass. I stopped to check the map and compass. According to my calculations, I was on the right path, but the trail was less maintained here. I liked that. I wanted the forest to feel more wild. I pressed on, stepping carefully over roots and loose stones. The air grew cooler and damper. I crossed a small stream by hopping over mossy rocks. The sound of water was a comforting presence, steady and calm. I noticed the birds had become quieter too. Maybe it was the time of day or the denser trees. I didn't mind. I was alone but not lonely. The forest felt like a living thing watching me. The sun had climbed higher now, and patches of blue sky peeked through the canopy. I found a good spot by the stream and stopped for a break. I sat on a fallen log, pulled out some trail mix, and drank water from my bottle. The quiet was almost complete, except for the occasional chirp or the murmur of water. I closed my eyes for a moment, just enjoying the peace. After resting, I got back up and continued. The trail grew steeper as I climbed the ridge. The trees thinned out in some places, revealing views of the valley below. It was beautiful, endless green stretching out with rivers winding through. I paused often, both to catch my breath and to take it all in. The physical effort was worth it for the views alone. Eventually, I reached the top of the ridge. Here, the trail was little more than a dirt path, and I had to be careful where I stepped. Loose gravel and dry leaves covered the ground, making it slippery in spots. The wind picked up, cooler and stronger, making the branches creak. I zipped up my jacket and focused on my footing. It was around mid-afternoon when I saw something that made my skin tighten. About 50 feet ahead, there was a section where the path seemed disturbed. Not just natural debris, but something that looked like it had been stepped on recently. Broken branches and crushed grass in an odd pattern, like something large had passed through not long ago. I stopped and looked carefully. There were faint tracks in the soft earth, too large to be a dog or a deer. My heart beat faster, but I tried to keep calm. It was probably a large animal, maybe a bear or a wild boar. I wasn't in bear country according to the ranger's office, but you never know. I took out my whistle and gave a few short blasts. No answer. I figured that was good. The animal had moved on. I kept walking, but more cautiously, staying alert. As I walked on, I noticed the forest was growing darker. The tall trees here were closer together, blocking more sunlight. The underbrush thickened too. I had to push branches aside and step over fallen logs. My boots got wet crossing a shallow creek. My legs felt tired, but I told myself it was normal. Hiking was supposed to be hard. I checked my watch. I wanted to reach the lake before it got too late. The map showed I was close, maybe a mile or so. I pushed ahead, eyes scanning for any sign of water. Suddenly, the trail opened up to a small clearing. I stepped into it and froze. There, in the middle, was an abandoned campsite. A circle of stones marked a fire pit, blackened with old ashes. There were pieces of torn fabric tangled in the bushes and scattered bits of trash. A crushed soda can, a plastic wrapper, a broken flashlight lying half buried in the dirt. The ground was trampled like someone had been here recently. I didn't like that at all. No one was around, but the campsite gave me an uneasy feeling. It was like the place was waiting for someone. I scanned the surrounding forest. Everything looked quiet, but the silence felt thick, unnatural. I thought about turning back, but knew I didn't want to lose progress. The lake was close, and I needed to find a safe place to camp before dark. I decided to keep moving and leave the campsite behind. I walked quickly, the hairs on my neck prickling. The trail got harder to follow here. The forest closed in more, and the ground was uneven. I had to use my hands to steady myself on rocks and roots. My breathing was heavier now, more from tension than the climb. After about 20 minutes, I heard something. A rustling sound, faint but close. I stopped and held my breath. The sound came again, like twigs snapping underfoot, but no clear shape. I turned slowly, scanning the trees. Nothing moved. I told myself it was probably a deer or some small animal, but my body didn't agree. My hands trembled slightly as I gripped my walking stick tighter. I moved on faster now. The sun was lowering behind the ridge, and shadows stretched long and dark. I looked down and saw the trail ahead forked. The map wasn't clear on which way to go. Both paths looked like they led deeper into the forest. I stood there, feeling the weight of the silence around me. The rustling sound started again, this time from the right path. It was too loud to be a bird or a squirrel. It sounded deliberate. Footsteps, slow and heavy. I didn't want to believe it. I wanted to think it was my imagination or some wild animal. But I knew better. I had been alone in the woods enough times to tell the difference between a deer and a human. I chose the left path, hoping to avoid whatever was making that noise. I walked as fast as I dared without running. The trees closed in tighter here, and I had to duck under branches. The forest floor was covered in dry leaves, making every step noisy. After a few minutes, the trail ended abruptly at a steep embankment. I looked down and saw a small stream. The water was clear and cold. I could follow it down to the lake, but it meant climbing down a slippery slope. I took a deep breath and started carefully down the embankment, feeling the loose dirt slide under my boots. I held on to roots and rocks to steady myself. When I reached the bottom, I followed the stream's edge. The forest here was dense. The underbrush caught at my pants, and I had to push branches away. The light was fading fast now. The last pale rays of sun filtered through the trees, but the woods felt like a shadow world. I heard the footsteps again, louder this time, coming from behind me. My heart pounded. I stopped and turned slowly, but there was nothing. The shadows played tricks on my eyes. I started walking faster along the stream. My eyes scanned for any sign of a trail or the lake. I was hoping to find a flat spot to set up camp soon. The forest suddenly opened into a clearing. The lake was right there, a smooth sheet of dark water reflecting the evening sky. The surface was still, except for occasional ripples from fish or insects. The air smelled fresh and clean, but I felt no relief. The feeling of being watched was heavy. I found a good place to camp near some pine trees. The ground was dry and flat. I set down my pack and pulled out the tent. My hands shook slightly as I worked. I wanted to get everything ready before it got too dark. I've been looking forward to this hike for weeks. The plan was to spend 3 days alone on a remote trail in the national forest, far away from towns and traffic. I needed the time to clear my head, away from everything noisy and crowded. I was used to hiking alone and felt confident. The trail wasn't popular, but it was marked well enough on the maps I had. I packed carefully with plenty of food, water, and emergency gear. My backpack was heavy but manageable. The morning I left, the sun was just rising through the thick pine trees around my house. The air was cold and crisp, a sure sign that spring was still holding onto the mountains. I drove an hour to the trailhead, parking my old SUV on the gravel lot. No other cars were there, which I liked. The silence was thick, broken only by birds and the occasional rustle of wind through the leaves. I strapped on my pack, double-checked my map, and started down the trail. First, everything felt peaceful. The dirt path wound through towering firs and scattered boulders. Early wildflowers dotted the edges, tiny purple and yellow petals brightening the damp forest floor. I breathed deeply, feeling the clean mountain air fill my lungs. For the first few hours, I saw no one. I passed a small stream that gurgled quietly over smooth stones and stopped briefly to refill my water bottle. The forest was dense here, and the canopy above made the light dim, even at midday. The trail was sometimes rocky and steep, but I took it slow and steady, stopping every so often to rest and eat a snack. As the afternoon sun climbed higher, I reached a clearing where the trees opened up to a ridge. From here, I could see down into the valley below. The sight was beautiful. Rolling hills covered in pine and patches of snow from the last cold spell. I sat on a flat rock and took it all in. I felt small and peaceful, like the world had slowed down just for me. After the break, I headed deeper into the forest. The trail narrowed and became less maintained. I had to step carefully over roots and loose rocks. I liked that it felt more wild here, less traveled by people. The only sounds were birds and the occasional snap of a twig underfoot. By late afternoon, I found a small campsite near a creek where I planned to stay the first night. It was perfect, flat ground, dry enough to pitch my tent, and close to water. I set up quickly, thankful for the light still left in the sky. After dinner, I sat by the fire and watched as the flames flickered against the darkening woods. The forest grew quiet. No bugs buzzing, no distant voices, just silence. I felt good. I liked being alone with nature. But that night, things started to feel different. I woke once to a strange noise outside my tent, a soft rustling, like something moving through leaves. I stayed still, listening hard. The sound stopped quickly. I told myself it was probably an animal, maybe a deer or a raccoon. Nothing to worry about. I fell back asleep. The next day, I got an early start. The sky was overcast and gray. The air was damp and smelled like wet earth. The trail was harder now, steeper and more uneven. I climbed carefully, gripping roots and rocks as I made my way up the mountain. The forest here was thicker, darker. The trees stood close together, their branches twisting overhead like a tangled web. It felt colder, too, as if the sun's warmth couldn't reach this far down. I stopped at a bend in the trail and looked around. The place gave me a strange feeling. Not quite fear, but a kind of tightness in my chest. I shook it off. Maybe I was just tired. I pressed on. A few hours later, I reached a fork in the trail. According to my map, the right path would take me to a small lake where I planned to camp the next night. The left went to a ridge lookout that wasn't part of my route but looked interesting. I debated for a moment, then decided to check out the ridge. I thought a short detour would be nice, and I could always return to the main trail later. The left path quickly got rougher. The dirt was loose and dry, and I had to use my hands to scramble over rocks and fallen logs. The forest here felt older. The trees were bigger and bent by years of wind and snow. Shadows crept along the ground. After about an hour of climbing, I reached the ridge. The view was spectacular, a jagged panorama of mountains stretching in every direction. I stood there for a while, catching my breath and soaking it in. But then I noticed something odd. Down below on the main trail, I could see a figure moving slowly through the trees. It was hard to make out details, but it was a person, maybe a hiker like me. At first, I didn't think much of it, but the figure kept walking in circles, never leaving the same small patch of forest. I watched for several minutes. The person seemed to be looking around nervously, turning their head quickly as if they were afraid or lost. That feeling in my chest returned, stronger this time. Something was wrong. I waited a little longer, but the figure didn't move away from that spot. Then suddenly they stopped moving entirely, just standing there. The sun dipped behind the clouds, and the forest seemed to grow even darker. I felt cold sweat on my back. I decided to head back down. I hurried along the rough trail, my heart beating faster. The forest noises seemed louder now, twigs snapping, leaves rustling, but there was no one else around. When I got back to the fork, I took the main trail toward the lake, trying to calm down. The path flattened out and became easier to walk. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see the figure again, but the forest was empty. I arrived at the lake just before sunset. The water was still and clear, reflecting the gray sky. I found a small spot near the shore to set up camp. As I worked to pitch my tent, I kept thinking about the figure on the ridge. Who were they? Why were they wandering in circles? And why had they stopped moving? I didn't want to imagine the worst, but I couldn't shake the unease. That night was colder than the first. The wind picked up, rattling the trees and carrying strange sounds through the forest. Distant animal calls, branches scraping against each other, and something else. Something I couldn't identify. I tried to ignore it, burrowing deep into my sleeping bag. Around midnight, I woke again. This time, the noises were closer. I heard footsteps outside my tent. Slow, deliberate. Someone walking carefully on the soft ground. My heart pounded so loud I was sure they would hear it. I lay perfectly still, holding my breath. The footsteps stopped just outside. Then I heard a faint scraping, like someone dragging a stick or a rock. A chill ran down my spine. I wanted to call out, to yell, but my throat was dry and tight. Minutes passed. Then the footsteps moved away, fading into the night. I didn't sleep again. At first light, I packed up quickly and started hiking back the way I came. My eyes scanned the trees constantly, every shadow and shape making me jump. The trail was empty. I kept expecting to see the figure, but there was nothing. When I reached the fork where I'd seen them last, I stopped and looked carefully. There were no footprints or signs of anyone passing through recently, just the usual marks from animals and the wind. That made me even more uneasy. Where had that person gone? And what were they doing on that ridge, wandering and then standing still? I hurried down the trail toward the parking lot. I wanted to get back to safety as fast as I could. On the way, I heard a faint cry, a human voice, sharp and brief. It sounded like someone calling for help. I froze, listening. The sound came again, but it was distant and fading. I ran toward where I thought the voice had come from. After several minutes, I reached a narrow side trail that led deeper into the woods. I hesitated, but I couldn't ignore the call. I followed the path for about half a mile until I found a small clearing. In the center was a young man, sitting on the ground with his head in his hands. He looked disoriented and scared. I approached slowly and asked if he was okay. He told me he'd gotten lost the day before and had been wandering the forest, trying to find his way back. He had no water and was weak from hunger. I gave him some of my food and water and helped him to his feet. Together, we walked back toward the trailhead. He thanked me over and over. It turned out he'd been hiking alone, just like me, and had taken the wrong turn at the fork, getting stuck on the ridge. He'd been wandering in circles, unable to find the trail. When we finally reached the parking lot, I called park rangers on my phone. They came quickly, taking him to safety. I realized how lucky I was to have packed extra supplies and to have been paying attention to the trail. That experience stayed with me long after I left the forest. I never forgot how easy it was to get lost and how dangerous the wilderness can be when you're alone. From then on, I always told people to prepare carefully and never underestimate the power of the outdoors. It's beautiful, yes, but it's also unpredictable. And sometimes, the scariest thing out there isn't some monster or ghost. It's just being lost, alone, and afraid in a place that feels like it might swallow you. I want to tell you about the hiking trip that turned into one of the most frightening experiences of my life. It was a trip I planned alone, something I had done many times before. I liked hiking alone. It was peaceful, a way to clear my mind and get away from everything. But this time, something about that trip stuck with me, something I can't forget. It all started on a late summer morning. The air was cool, but the sun was already rising, casting a soft orange glow over the trees. I was heading to a remote trail in the mountains not far from where I live. It was a trail I had read about in a hiking guide, not very popular, and perfect for someone like me who wanted solitude. The trail was supposed to be about 8 miles round trip, through dense forest and rocky paths. Nothing too hard, but enough to keep my mind busy and my body moving. I packed my bag carefully the night before: water, some snacks, a map, a compass, my phone with extra battery, a small first aid kit, and a flashlight. I wore sturdy boots and comfortable clothes. I told a friend where I was going and roughly when I expected to be back. She knew the area well and promised to check in if I wasn't back by nightfall. The drive there was quiet. The road wound up the mountain, twisting and turning. The trees grew taller and thicker as I got closer to the trailhead. When I parked the car, I noticed how silent it was. Not a bird was singing, and even the wind felt still. It gave me a small chill, but I brushed it off. Sometimes, the deeper in the forest you go, the quieter it gets. I locked the car, slung my backpack over my shoulders, and stepped onto the trail. The ground was soft with fallen leaves and pine needles. The trees were tall and close together, their branches forming a thick canopy overhead. Sunlight filtered through in small patches, creating dancing patterns on the path. At first, the hike was peaceful. I walked steadily, the sound of my boots crunching on leaves and small stones the only noise. Every so often, I stopped to drink water or take a photo of a wildflower or an interesting tree. The trail climbed gently, curving along the mountainside. The air smelled fresh and earthy. I felt good. About 2 hours in, I reached a small clearing with a fallen log. I sat down to rest and eat a granola bar. I checked my map and compass. Everything matched up. The trail was marked clearly, and I was exactly where I was supposed to be. From the clearing, I could see a distant ridge with jagged rocks silhouetted against the blue sky. It was beautiful. I got up and kept going. The trail narrowed and became steeper, winding between rocks and tree roots. The forest was dense here, and the light dimmer. I noticed something then. The silence was deeper now. Not just quiet, but a kind of heavy silence. No birds, no insects, nothing. The kind of silence that feels like the whole forest is holding its breath. I tried to shake off the feeling. I told myself it was normal. Maybe I had just left behind the parts of the forest where animals were active. I looked ahead and saw the trail disappearing into a thick patch of trees. I stepped forward, pushing branches aside. Then I noticed something else. The trail didn't look quite right. The ground was disturbed, as if someone or something had been there recently. There were footprints, heavy, uneven, and not human. They were big and deep, with claw marks at the edges. I stared at them, feeling a knot form in my stomach. I had read about bears in this area, but their tracks usually had clear, rounded toes. These were different. I decided to keep going, but more cautiously. I didn't want to panic or turn back too soon. I thought maybe a big animal like a bear or a mountain lion had passed through, but was probably gone by now. Still, I kept my eyes open. The trail climbed higher, the trees thinning out a little. I could see more of the mountain ridge ahead. I noticed that some of the trees had been scratched deeply, their bark peeled off in long lines. I knew animals did that sometimes to mark territory, but these scratches were fresh and looked aggressive. My heart was beating faster. I stopped and looked around carefully. There was no movement, but the feeling that I was being watched was strong. I told myself again it was just nerves. I was alone, but I was prepared. I continued walking. The trail curved sharply, and I entered a narrow valley between two ridges. The sun was high now, but shadows stretched long because of the steep slopes. The valley was dense with bushes and small trees. Felt darker here. Then I heard it. A low growl, almost a rumble, coming from somewhere to my right. I froze. The sound was close but hidden by the thick bushes. My first thought was a bear. I knew bears could be dangerous, but if I stayed calm and didn't run, I might avoid trouble. I slowly backed away, stepping carefully so as not to make noise. I kept looking to my right, trying to spot movement. The growl came again, louder this time. It sounded angry, like the animal was upset at my presence. I decided to move quickly but quietly back the way I came. The trail was uneven, with rocks and roots that could trip me if I wasn't careful. I kept my breathing steady and tried to stay as calm as possible. After a few minutes, I stopped to listen. The growling had stopped. The forest was silent again. I debated whether to turn around and head back to the clearing, or to push forward and finish the hike. The sun was already past its highest point, so I knew I had to decide soon. I chose to keep going but stayed close to the edge of the trail where I could see the clearing ahead. I kept scanning for any signs of the animal. Then I saw it, a large shadow moving between the trees about 50 feet away. It was huge, bigger than any bear I had seen in pictures. It moved slowly but deliberately. I couldn't make out many details because of the shadows, but it looked muscular and powerful. I felt a rush of fear I hadn't felt before. I didn't want to run, but I also didn't want to get closer. My legs felt frozen. I remembered the safety advice about making yourself look big and making noise to scare off wild animals, but I didn't want to provoke it. Instead, I slowly backed away, keeping my eyes on the shadow. The path behind me was clear, so I started walking faster, stepping carefully but not looking back. My heart pounded in my chest. I could feel sweat running down my back despite the cool air. I reached the clearing and didn't stop. I kept walking down the trail, not caring about the views anymore. I just wanted to get back to my car. The way back felt endless. Every sound made me jump. A twig snapping, a bird calling in the distance, the wind rustling leaves. I kept looking behind me, half expecting to see the shadow following. But the forest stayed quiet. About an hour later, I finally saw the parking area. Relief flooded through me. I quickened my pace, eager to get inside the car. When I reached the car, I fumbled with my keys, hands shaking. I got in, locked the doors, and started the engine. The radio was silent. I didn't even want to listen to music. I just wanted to get home. The drive down the mountain was slow. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something chasing me. But there was nothing. Once I was back in town, safe on the main road, I allowed myself to relax. I called my friend to let her know I was okay. She was worried because I hadn't checked in. I told her about the big animal, the tracks, the scratches on the trees, and the growling. She said it might have been a large mountain lion or possibly a bear, but either way, it was unusual to be so close to the trail and to act that way. I couldn't stop thinking about the hike for days afterward. The fear, the silence, the feeling of being watched. It stayed with me. I realized that nature is beautiful but can be unpredictable and dangerous. Since then, I have been much more careful about where and when I hike alone. I carry bear spray now, and I avoid remote trails where big predators might roam. That day taught me a hard lesson about respect and caution in the wild. Looking back, I'm glad I stayed calm and didn't run. Running could have triggered a chase. Staying steady, moving slowly, and keeping aware probably saved me. Even though the experience was scary, I don't regret the hike. It showed me the power of the wild and reminded me how small and vulnerable we can be in nature. But it also made me respect the forest more and prepared me to be safer next time. The sun was just beginning to rise when I started my hike. It was early spring, and the forest was still shaking off the last bits of winter. The air was crisp, cool enough to see my breath in little clouds as I exhaled. I had planned this solo hike weeks before, marking a trail deep into a national forest area that few people ever visited. It wasn't a popular trail, the maps barely showed it, and most people preferred the well-groomed paths closer to the entrance. But I liked quiet, and I wanted a challenge. I wanted to see the woods at their rawest. I had a backpack loaded with the basics: water, some snacks, a map, a compass, a first aid kit, and a flashlight. My boots were sturdy, my jacket thick enough to hold off the chill. I told myself I was ready. The trailhead was small, just a narrow dirt path disappearing between two large pine trees. The ground was still muddy in places, and I could hear the distant sound of a stream running somewhere off to my right. As I stepped onto the path, I took a deep breath and began walking. The first few hours were peaceful. The forest opened and closed around me like a living tunnel of green and brown. I passed patches of wildflowers starting to bloom, and I saw fresh deer tracks in the mud. Occasionally, a woodpecker knocked at a tree, or a squirrel darted across the trail. The sounds were natural, comforting in their own way. I kept checking my map and compass, making sure I was heading north. The path twisted and climbed gradually, taking me over mossy rocks and through stands of old firs. The sun climbed higher, and I began to sweat under my jacket. I stopped once to take a drink and eat a granola bar. The forest smelled earthy and alive, a mix of pine needles and wet soil. About 4 hours into the hike, I reached a small clearing. It was a nice spot. Sunlight spilled over a patch of grass surrounded by thick trees. I sat down for a moment, feeling the warmth on my face. I looked back at the trail behind me. The path continued ahead, winding into a thicker part of the forest. This is where things started to feel different. I noticed the silence. It wasn't the natural quiet of the woods. The birds were gone. No rustle of leaves, no insects buzzing. The air felt heavy, like it was waiting for something. I stood up quickly, brushing off my pants. My heartbeat ticked up a little. I looked around carefully but saw nothing unusual. I shook off the feeling, told myself it was just my mind playing tricks after hours alone. I kept moving forward. The trail became less clear as I walked. The undergrowth thickened, and branches scratched at my jacket and face. I had to push through bushes and duck under low-hanging limbs. My boots sank in patches of mud. The forest around me grew darker, even though the sun was still up. I checked my map again. The trail was supposed to turn sharply left at the next big rock outcropping, but I saw no sign of it. No clear path, only thick trees and tangled brush. I stopped and tried to reorient myself. The compass said I was still headed north, but the trail was gone. I looked at the map carefully, tracing the lines with my finger. Maybe I missed the turn. I backtracked slowly, stepping carefully through the bushes. The forest seemed to close in tighter. I felt a prickling at the back of my neck, like something was watching. I told myself I was being paranoid. I'm not a kid. I'm experienced. But my heart was pounding harder now. I slowed my breathing, trying to calm down. Then I heard it. A soft crack, like a branch snapping somewhere behind me. I froze. My eyes scanned the trees, but I couldn't see anything. I stood perfectly still, listening. Nothing else. I decided to keep moving forward. After what felt like an hour of careful searching, I found a faint track that looked like a trail. It wasn't marked, but it was more open than the bushes around it. I followed it, hoping it would lead me back to the main path. The trail twisted and climbed a bit more. I was tired, thirsty, and my legs ached. My stomach was growling, but I forced myself to keep going. I didn't want to stop and lose my way. After another half hour, I reached a ridge overlooking a small valley. The view was breathtaking. Trees stretched out in every direction, with a river shining silver in the distance. I took out my water bottle and drank deeply. I sat on a rock for a moment, trying to steady my nerves. I looked at my map and compass again. The river on the map matched the one below me. That meant I was close to the edge of the forest and a road that ran along the river. If I could reach the road, I could get help or find my way home. I packed up and started downhill toward the river. The slope was steep and covered in loose rocks. I moved slowly, careful not to slip. My legs burned with every step. Halfway down, I saw something strange near a clump of bushes, a small pile of torn clothing. It looked like an old jacket, ripped and dirty. I felt a chill. Why was it here? Who left it? I kept moving, trying not to think about it. Then I heard voices. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but the sound grew clearer. Low, angry voices talking in harsh tones. I froze again, listening hard. The voices were coming from the river valley below. I knew I had two choices: keep going toward the voices or try to climb back up and find another way. I didn't want trouble, but I also didn't want to be stuck in the woods all night. I decided to move down carefully, staying out of sight in the bushes. As I got closer, I could see figures moving near the riverbank. They were men wearing rough clothes, carrying large bags. They looked like they were unloading something from a truck parked out of sight. Something about the scene didn't feel right. I couldn't tell exactly what they were doing, but the way they looked around nervously made me uneasy. I stayed hidden, watching. Suddenly, one of the men spotted me. He shouted something, and the others turned. I felt a surge of panic. They started moving toward my hiding spot. I turned and ran. My boots slapped hard against the dirt, branches whipping my face and arms. I didn't look back. I just ran, faster than I thought I could. The forest blurred around me. My breath came in short gasps. I could hear shouting behind me, but I didn't stop. After what felt like forever, I burst out of the thick woods onto a narrow dirt road. It was the road I saw on the map, running alongside the river. I didn't wait. I started walking fast, sticking to the side, watching the tree line behind me. After about 20 minutes, I saw headlights coming toward me. It was a pickup truck. I waved my arms, trying to get the driver's attention. The truck slowed, stopped. I climbed in, relieved. The driver was an older man, rough but kind-eyed. I told him about the men down by the river, and he nodded grimly. He explained that the area was known for illegal dumping and poaching. Sometimes dangerous groups would use the forest for shady business, and hikers were warned to stay away from certain parts. He drove me back to the ranger station, where I reported what I saw. The rangers said they would send a team to investigate. I went home that day, tired but safe. The experience stayed with me, though. I kept thinking about the forest, the men, and how easy it was to get lost or stumble into something dangerous. I never went back to that trail. Instead, I stuck to well-traveled paths, places where I knew people would be. I learned that nature could be beautiful and terrifying, not because of ghosts or myths, but because of real dangers, wild animals, rough terrain, and sometimes other people. And sometimes, the scariest thing is just being alone, lost, and unsure who or what you might meet. I have always loved hiking. Ever since I was a kid, the woods called to me. The smell of pine, the crunch of leaves underfoot, the quiet that surrounds you when you get away from the city. It all feels like home. There's a certain peace I find on a trail, a feeling that nothing bad can touch me out there. I was confident in my skills and experience, so when I planned a solo trip on a long trail deep in the mountains, I thought it would be just another great adventure. I chose a trail that ran through a national forest I had never been to before. It was known to be challenging but beautiful, with dense woods, rocky ridges, and quiet streams. The plan was to hike about 15 miles a day and camp overnight for 3 days, then come back. I packed my backpack carefully, water filter, enough food for 4 days, a lightweight tent, sleeping bag, extra clothes, first aid kit, compass, map, and my trusty headlamp. I also had my phone, but I didn't expect much signal out there. The morning I started, the sky was clear and the air was crisp. The trailhead was quiet except for a few early hikers. I said goodbye to the parking lot and started walking on the narrow dirt path. The forest was thick, the trees tall and green, the ground soft from fallen pine needles. Birds sang overhead, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves. The first few miles went smoothly. I felt strong and light, my pack not too heavy. As the day went on, the trail got harder. It climbed steadily uphill, winding through rocky sections covered with moss. My boots scraped against stones, and I had to watch my footing carefully. At times, the trail crossed small creeks, and I had to hop from rock to rock to keep my feet dry. I stopped several times to drink water and snack. The forest was peaceful, but I noticed how quiet it had gotten. No other hikers, no animals visible, just me and the trees. Around midday, I reached a clearing on a ridge. From there, I could see miles of forest stretching out beneath me. The sun was high, and the sky was bright blue. I sat on a large rock to rest, ate a sandwich, and filled my water bottle from a small stream nearby. The water was cold and fresh. I took a moment to breathe in the air. It smelled of pine and earth, clean and sharp. After the break, I continued on. The trail narrowed and became steeper. At one point, I had to use my hands to scramble up a steep rock face. My muscles burned, but the adrenaline kept me going. I kept telling myself to be careful and not rush. I moved steadily and finally reached the top of the ridge, where the trail flattened out again. By late afternoon, I started to look for a good place to camp. I wanted to find a flat spot near water but away from any animal paths or obvious hazards. After about an hour of searching, I found a small clearing surrounded by thick bushes and trees. There was a shallow creek nearby. The ground was soft and covered with dry pine needles. I set up my tent carefully, making sure it was secure. I gathered some dry wood and made a small fire. Cooking on the trail was simple. I boiled water for my freeze-dried meal and ate while watching the sun dip behind the trees. The forest began to darken. The sounds of birds quieted, and the evening air cooled. I crawled into my sleeping bag early, tired but content. That night, I slept lightly. I heard the usual nighttime sounds: owls hooting, leaves rustling, small animals moving in the underbrush. Nothing unusual. I felt safe inside my tent. The next morning, I woke before dawn. I packed up quickly and ate a simple breakfast of granola bars and dried fruit. The air was still cool, and a light fog hung over the trees. I could see my breath as I moved. The trail continued deeper into the forest, heading downhill towards a valley. As I walked, I noticed signs of recent rain. Muddy patches, wet leaves, and small pools on the path. The ground was slippery in places. I slowed my pace to avoid slipping. The forest felt denser here, the trees close together, their branches forming a canopy that blocked most of the sunlight. Shadows stretched across the path. About 3 miles into the day, I came to a junction marked on my map. One trail led to a small waterfall a few miles away. The other continued along the main route. I decided to take the side trail to the waterfall, thinking it would be a nice spot to rest and refill water. The path to the waterfall was narrow and winding. It climbed over rocks and crossed several small streams. I had to be careful stepping on slippery stones. The sound of rushing water grew louder as I got closer, mixing with the birdsong and wind in the trees. When I finally reached the waterfall, it was more beautiful than I expected. Water poured down a rocky cliff into a clear pool surrounded by moss-covered boulders. The spray created a fine mist in the air, making the stones glisten. I took off my pack, drank some water, and filled my bottle from the pool. The cool water refreshed me. After resting for about 20 minutes, I started back on the main trail. The sun was higher now, shining through gaps in the trees. The path climbed again, winding up a steep hill covered with fallen leaves and pine needles. I focused on my footing to avoid slipping. Then, about halfway up the hill, I saw something unusual. The trail looked disturbed. Broken branches, footprints, and crushed plants. It didn't look like deer or small animals. The footprints were large and irregular, as if someone had hurried through. My heart beat a little faster, but I told myself it was probably just other hikers or forest workers. I kept walking but stayed alert. The forest seemed quieter now. No birds, no rustling animals. Just the sound of my boots on the leaves. The sky had clouded over, and the air felt heavier, like before a storm. Suddenly, I heard a snapping sound behind me. I stopped and turned quickly, but I didn't see anything. I listened carefully, no voices, no footsteps, just the wind through the trees. I told myself it was a deer or a branch falling. I started walking again, but now I was more cautious. I checked my phone for signal, still nothing. I tightened my backpack straps and kept my hand near my pocket knife, just in case. The trail got steeper and rockier, making it harder to walk fast. As I reached the top of the hill, I realized the sky was darkening fast. Thick gray clouds rolled in, blocking the sun completely. A cold wind picked up, shaking the trees and making the branches creak. I decided I needed to find a place to camp quickly. The map showed a small clearing a half-mile ahead, near a ridge. I hurried along the trail, my boots slipping on loose stones. I felt a growing sense of unease, like something was watching me. I tried to shake the feeling and focus on finding shelter. When I reached the clearing, it was worse than I expected. The ground was uneven, covered in roots and rocks. The wind blew sharply, and the trees around the edge bent with the gusts. I started setting up my tent as fast as I could, fumbling with the poles in the growing darkness. The sky opened up and rain started to fall. First a drizzle, then a steady downpour. I finished pitching the tent, crawling inside as the wind howled and rain pounded the fabric. Inside the tent, I pulled out my rain jacket and put it on, then lay down, listening to the storm. Hours passed, and the rain didn't stop. The sound of water hitting the tent was almost loud enough to block out everything else. The wind gusted, making the tent flap and creak. I could hear small branches breaking somewhere nearby. Then I heard it, another snap, close this time. My heart jumped. The sound was definitely not from the storm. It was something moving through the brush, breaking twigs. I stayed as still as I could, holding my breath, trying to hear more. For a long time, there was nothing but the rain and wind. Then, faint footsteps, slow, careful steps circling the clearing. I couldn't see anything through the rain-streaked tent fabric, but I could hear it clearly. The footsteps stopped suddenly, then started again on the other side. Fear gripped me. I thought about the footprints I had seen earlier and the snapping sounds behind me on the trail. Someone was out there in the woods with me. I didn't want to open the tent or make noise. I gripped my pocket knife tightly and whispered a silent prayer that whoever it was would leave. The footsteps continued, moving slowly around the clearing. Then, just as suddenly as they had started, they stopped. I heard the soft sound of fabric brushing against leaves, then silence. The rain began to lessen, and the wind died down. I lay awake the rest of the night, listening for any more sounds, my heart pounding every time the tent moved. I didn't sleep well at all. At first light, I packed up quickly, eager to get out of that spot. The rain had stopped, and the forest was quiet again, but I still felt watched. I kept my eyes open for any signs of the person who had been there. As I descended the trail toward the trailhead, I stayed alert. I avoided the broken branches and footprints I had seen before. I moved fast but carefully, wanting to finish the hike safely. When I finally reached my I never thought that a simple hike would turn into one of the scariest experiences of my life. It was supposed to be a weekend trip, a break from the city noise, the screens, and the constant rush. I had planned it for weeks. A solo hike through a section of the wilderness I had never been to before. The trail promised deep woods, a quiet river, and a chance to be alone with nature. I wanted to clear my head, get some exercise, and feel free. I thought I knew what to expect. I thought I was prepared. The morning I left, everything felt normal. The sun was just starting to rise, casting a soft orange glow over the trees. The air smelled fresh and cool. I double-checked my pack, water, snacks, map, compass, first aid kit, flashlight, and my phone with GPS downloaded offline. I had learned to always be careful after hearing too many stories about hikers getting lost. I told a few friends where I was going, the trail I planned to follow, and when I expected to be back. I had no intention of getting into trouble. The trailhead was quiet, just a few cars in the parking lot. I slipped on my boots and started walking. The path was narrow but clear, with fallen leaves underfoot and the sound of birds in the trees. The forest was dense but inviting. I could hear the wind rustling through the branches, the occasional snap of a twig. The air smelled of pine, earth, and something faintly sweet, maybe wildflowers or the scent of moss, felt peaceful. First, the hike was easy. The trail rose gently, winding through the woods and alongside a small creek. I paused sometimes to take pictures of the water or the sunlight filtering through the leaves. I drank water, ate a granola bar, and felt the calmness settle in my chest. I kept checking my map and compass, making sure I was on track. The trail was marked with small white blazes painted on trees, and I followed them carefully. A few hours in, the trail split. The map showed two options. One path continued along the creek and was longer but flatter. The other went uphill and was shorter but steeper. I chose the hill. I liked the idea of a view from the top. The climb was harder than I expected. The dirt was loose in places, and tree roots made footing tricky. My legs burned, and I had to stop more often. Sweat ran down my back. Still, I felt good, alive, challenged, in control. When I reached the summit, the forest opened up to a small clearing. I stood there, breathing heavily, and looked out over the valley. The trees stretched in every direction, a sea of green. The river sparkled far below. The sky was a perfect blue, dotted with fluffy clouds. I pulled out my water bottle and sat on a rock. I felt proud, alone in the wilderness, and I had made it to the top. I checked my watch. I was right on schedule. I took a moment to enjoy the quiet and the view before heading back down the other side. The descent was even trickier. Loose gravel slid under my boots, and I had to slow my pace. I kept my eyes on the trail, counting my steps to keep track of distance. After about an hour, I reached the bottom and found a narrow path leading toward the river. The path hugged the bank, weaving through tall grass and low bushes. The water was clear and cold, rushing over smooth rocks. I could see fish darting in the shadows. The sun was higher now, and I felt warm. I stopped to refill my water bottle from the stream. The cool water was refreshing. Then, things started to feel off. I had been walking for a while when I noticed the trail markings stopped. The white blazes I had followed so carefully were nowhere to be found. I stopped and looked around. The forest was dense here, the trees closer together. The ground was soft with fallen needles and leaves. The path was less clear, almost blending in with the underbrush. I pulled out my map and compass again. I checked the compass needle. It pointed north, and according to my map, the trail should be going north too. But I didn't see any trail at all. I took a few steps forward, trying to find any sign of the path. Nothing. I turned and looked behind me. The way I came was covered with thick bushes and trees. It was hard to see the trail I had just walked on. I started to feel uneasy. My heart beat faster. Maybe I had missed a turn? I tried retracing my steps. I walked back, carefully looking for any sign of a marker. Still nothing. My boots crunched on dead leaves and twigs, but no trail. I stopped again and sat on a fallen log. I pulled out my phone to check the GPS, but the signal was weak, barely any bars. The offline map loaded slowly. It showed I was somewhere near the river, but it didn't give me the precise trail I needed. I tried zooming out and in, but it was unclear. I took a deep breath and tried to calm myself. I told myself not to panic. I was trained for this. I had the map, the compass, and enough supplies to last a day or two if needed. I was going to find the trail again. I stood up and started walking in what I thought was the right direction, keeping the river to my right. I figured if I followed it downstream, I would find a bridge or a road. The forest grew thicker, and the sky dimmed under the heavy canopy. The sounds of the river filled the air, but the forest itself was silent except for occasional bird calls. After some time, I realized I was getting tired. My legs ached, and my water was running low. The sun was beginning to sink behind the trees, and the shadows grew long and cold. I knew I had to find a safe place to rest before dark. I looked for a flat clearing or a spot where I could set up my small tent. Eventually, I found a tiny patch of ground, sheltered by a few thick pine trees. The ground was soft with needles, and the air smelled damp. I set up my tent quickly, using the last light of day. I gathered some dry sticks and leaves to build a small fire to keep warm. The process was slow and frustrating because the wood was wet in places. Still, after some effort, I had a small fire burning, and the flickering flames gave me some comfort. Sitting next to the fire, I tried to calm my mind. The forest was dark and mysterious now, the shadows moving with the flicker of flames. I felt a growing sense of loneliness and worry. What if I didn't find the trail tomorrow? What if I stayed lost for days? I reminded myself to stay calm and focused. I checked my supplies again, enough food and water, my flashlight with fresh batteries, a whistle, and my knife. I planned to rest now, get up early, and try again in daylight. I told myself this was just a challenge, a test of my skills. The night was long. Every little sound seemed louder. Twigs snapping, leaves rustling, the occasional distant call of an animal. I lay awake for hours listening, alert. Sleep came in short bursts, uneasy and shallow. Morning finally arrived, pale light filtering through the trees. I packed up quickly, doused the fire, and started walking again along the riverbank. The map still showed a trail nearby, but I couldn't see it. I followed the river downstream, hoping to find a road or some sign of civilization. Hours passed. The forest changed. The trees grew even denser, the ground muddier and slippery. I struggled to keep my footing, slipping once or twice. My clothes were damp with sweat and mud. My water bottle was nearly empty. Then I heard it, the sound of voices, faint but clear. My heart jumped. I followed the sound cautiously, pushing through thick branches. The voices grew louder. Soon I reached a small clearing. There I saw a group of hikers, a few tents, and a campfire. They looked surprised to see me but offered water and food without question. Relief flooded through me. I told them briefly what happened, showing my map and compass. One of them, an older man, said they were part of a larger group exploring nearby trails and knew the area well. They helped me plan a route back to the main trailhead. They insisted I stay with them until late afternoon to rest and eat. I gratefully accepted. The campfire warmed my chilled bones, and the kindness of strangers brought a new sense of hope. They had radios, first aid kits, and knowledge I didn't. We shared the sparse daylight, swapping stories and helping each other prepare for the trek back. When the time came to leave, they guided me along a marked path that led to the road. The walk was still tough, steep climbs, rough terrain, but I felt safer knowing I was not alone. I kept my eyes on the trail markers and trusted my new friends. By evening, we reached the parking lot. The cars were there, and I saw my own car among them. I thanked everyone and felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude and relief. The forest was behind me now, but the memory of being lost, of the fear and uncertainty, stayed with me. Driving home, I thought about the whole experience. How easy it was to lose your way, even when you think you're prepared. How small mistakes can grow into dangerous situations. How important it is to stay calm and keep your wits about you. And how powerful kindness and help from strangers can be. I learned a lot from that hike. I learned to respect the wilderness more, to double-check my maps and pay closer attention to the trail, to carry. My name is Dee Keller, and what I'm about to tell you happened back in October of 1990, deep in the pine woods of northern Georgia. I was 38 at the time, a casual hiker with a bit of an obsession for tracking down forgotten trails and neglected places. I'd just gotten out of a tough split and thought a quiet weekend in the woods might help me settle my mind. I didn't expect that trip would end up becoming something I'd carry with me forever. I left my beat-up '82 Jeep Cherokee in a dirt pull-off at the edge of the forest. The pine woods there have a strange kind of silence to them, like they're cut off from everything else in the world. Miles and miles of thick trees, and barely a sign of people anywhere. My plan was to follow an old trail to a rundown sawmill that supposedly sat about 8 miles in. The few locals I talked to about it were vague. When the place came up, they'd clam up fast or give these nervous glances like they wished they hadn't brought it up. The first stretch, maybe 3 miles or so, wasn't too bad. The path was overrun with weeds and underbrush, but nothing I couldn't push through. What stood out the most was the quiet. No chirping, no breeze, not even the sound of leaves moving. Just my boots crunching through soft dirt and twigs popping here and there. Around mile 5, I found something that made me stop. Camp long abandoned. The tent was ripped to shreds, like something had clawed it up real good. The campfire was black and half buried under leaves, and there was scattered gear lying around. Rotted packs, a moldy sleeping bag, pots rusted through. It all looked like it had only been left there a couple years at most. Not ancient, but not fresh either. It gave me a bad feeling, but I kept walking. At mile 7, the trail just gave out. No markers, no signs, nothing but overgrowth. I had to rely on my compass and my general sense of where I was going. That's when I heard movement, something big shifting in the trees. My first thought was deer, maybe even a bear, but the way it moved didn't match. The steps were off, too slow, too staggered, not the steady gait of a normal animal. I stopped walking and listened. The noise stopped too. I scanned the woods, but all I could see were the thick trees and the evening light starting to fade. I called out, "Hey!" Even though I didn't expect an answer, I didn't get one either. But something in my gut told me I wasn't alone anymore. I started moving faster, wanting to find that mill before the sun dropped completely. The woods around me started to feel closer, like the trees were leaning in, the shadows stretching longer and darker with every step. My nerves were on edge. I reached the mill just before full dark. The place was barely standing. Wooden beams slouched, thick with moss and rot. It looked like it could fall apart if the wind blew too hard. The air felt heavier here, thick, almost like it was pressing down on me. I had the strong sense I was being watched. I almost turned around then, but told myself it was just my imagination getting ahead of me. I stepped into the mill. The boards groaned under me, and the place stank of mold mixed with a strange metallic odor. Rusht, maybe something else, maybe blood. I found broken down machines in one corner, all so rusted they barely looked like machines anymore. Then I saw a pile of bones. Some were clearly from animals, others weren't. Some were human. I backed away fast, heart thumping in my chest. That's when I noticed something crouched just beyond the clearing in the trees. At first, it looked like a man, maybe a hunter or another hiker. But as it moved, I knew right away it wasn't human. Its arms were too long, its movements too smooth and flexible, like something uncoiling from a tight knot. Its face, or what passed as one, was sunken and twisted, with a wide, gaping mouth full of uneven teeth. Its skin looked almost clear under the moonlight, stretched too tight over its frame. I did the only thing I could think of. I ran. I didn't stop to check behind me. I could hear it though. Every step it took was loud, like it wanted me to hear. I'd only gone 100 feet or so when I tripped over a buried root and slammed into the ground hard. The fall knocked the air out of me. Before I could get to my feet, it was on me. His thin fingers dug into my shoulders, sharp like bones. I fumbled with my pack, managed to grab the knife I always kept inside, and swung it wildly. The blade caught its flesh, and it let out a sound I can't describe. Wet and loud and not like anything I've heard before. The thing pulled back just enough for me to scramble upright. I ran again, the pain in my ankle dulled by fear. Behind me, I could hear it thrashing through the brush, faster, angrier now. I could feel something on my neck, like its breath, though I don't know if it even breathed. I was certain I wasn't going to make it. Then up ahead I saw a light, a flicker from what looked like a lantern, held by a man standing dead center on the trail. He looked to be in his early 70s, gray beard, wide eyes. I yelled at him to run, but he didn't move. Instead, he lifted a shotgun and aimed it over my shoulder. The blast was deafening. The thing behind me let out another one of those awful cries. I didn't stick around to see if it was dead or just scared off. We both ran, him leading the way, the lantern jerking in his hand, casting wild shapes through the trees. We didn't stop until we hit the parking lot, both of us out of breath and bleeding. The man, whose name turned out to be Jack, looked me over like he wasn't sure if I was even real. "You're lucky I was out here tonight," he said. His voice shook. "That thing's been seen around here for years. People vanish out here every now and then." The next day, the rangers came out. They found the mill and the bones. They didn't find the thing, but when they saw the claw marks carved into the trees near the mill, they didn't question our story too hard. I never saw Jack again after that night. Sometimes I think that's for the best. Some things maybe are just better left alone. It all started on a bright Saturday morning in early fall. The air was crisp and fresh, the kind of cool that hints winter is coming soon but hasn't fully arrived yet. I had planned this hike for weeks. I'm someone who loves the outdoors, the feeling of being alone in nature, away from all the noise and stress of everyday life. My plan was to hike a well-known trail that snakes through a thick forest about 2 hours from my home. I packed my backpack the night before with care. Water, snacks, a first aid kit, a flashlight, a map, and my phone fully charged. I was going to be smart about it. This wasn't my first hike. I'd been out on the trail many times before, and I never took any chances. The drive there was uneventful. I remember the highway cutting through rolling hills, the trees already changing colors in patches of orange, yellow, and red. It was beautiful. I stopped briefly at the trailhead, checked my gear again, and started walking at a steady pace. The trail was narrow but clear, lined with tall pine and oak trees. The sun shone through the branches in golden rays, and I could hear the occasional chirp of birds and the rustle of leaves in the light breeze. For the first hour, everything felt perfect. The path wound up and down small hills, passing over rocky streams and through dense groves of trees. The air smelled clean, with the faint scent of pine and earth. I kept an eye on the trail markers, confident in the map I had. I took my time, stopping occasionally to drink water or snap a picture of the scenery. Then, after about an hour and a half, something changed. The trail became less clear. The path narrowed and the trees grew thicker. The sunlight didn't reach the forest floor as much anymore. It felt cooler, almost colder. I noticed more dead leaves and branches on the ground, and the sound of wildlife became quieter. I told myself it was just the way this part of the forest was. I didn't know yet that this stretch of trail was less traveled, and fewer people had walked here in weeks or months. I kept going, but then I realized the trail markers were harder to find. I stopped and looked at the map again. The trail should have curved left here, but all I saw was a tangle of bushes and broken branches. I looked up and down the path, but it just seemed to disappear into thick undergrowth. I tried to find the trail again by looking for footprints or broken twigs, but it was like the forest swallowed the path whole. The longer I stood there, the more uneasy I felt. My heart started to beat faster, but I tried to calm myself. I reminded myself I had my phone and GPS. I checked the GPS. It showed I was close to where the trail should be, so I decided to push forward, hoping I'd find the trail again soon. I started to move slowly, stepping carefully over fallen logs and under low branches. The woods here were quiet, too quiet. No birds, no animals, nothing but the crunch of my boots on the leaves. After about 10 minutes of pushing through the brush, I spotted a faint line on the ground, a barely visible dirt path. Relief flooded me. I hurried toward it and started following it, telling myself this had to be the trail again. But then I noticed something else. Tracks in the mud. Not animal tracks, but footprints. Human footprints. They were fresh, maybe from earlier that day or the night before. They were big and deep, showing someone had walked this way carrying a heavy pack. I felt a strange chill, even though the air wasn't cold. I kept walking, following the prints. At first, I thought maybe someone else had taken the same detour I did. Maybe a lost hiker. But as I followed the prints further, the trail became steeper, rougher, and less safe. At one point, I had to climb down a steep rocky slope. My hands and feet searched for holds, and I was careful not to slip. The footprints stopped at the edge of the slope, then continued on a narrow ledge that ran along a steep drop. Looking down, I could see the forest floor far below, a long fall that would have been deadly. I swallowed hard but kept moving. The feeling of being watched grew heavier. I glanced behind me often, but I never saw anyone. Only trees, shadows, and silence. I reached a small clearing about 30 minutes later. The clearing was surrounded by tall trees, but in the middle was an old, abandoned cabin. It was made of wood, and the paint was faded and peeling. The roof sagged in the center, and some windows were broken. The door hung slightly open. My heart pounded. I had never heard of this cabin before, It wasn't on the map, and I didn't expect to find anything like this so far from the main trail. I decided not to go inside. Instead, I circled the clearing slowly, looking for any sign of who might have been here recently. The ground was littered with empty cans, some plastic wrappers, and a torn backpack strap. There were footprints all around, not just one set, but several. Some were fresh, others older. I realized this place might be a hideout for someone, maybe someone who didn't want to be found. A sinking feeling settled in my chest. I thought about turning back to the main trail, but I wasn't sure which way to go. The path back was swallowed by thick trees, and I had no clear idea which way was the right one. I checked my phone again. Battery was still good. GPS showed a little movement. I tried to zoom out and find the main trail, but the signal was weak. I knew I was off track and deep in the woods, but I hoped I could find my way back. Suddenly, I heard a snap behind me, a branch breaking close but hidden in the trees. I froze. The silence after the noise was even louder than before. I waited, heart in my throat, eyes scanning the tree line. Nothing moved. No bird flew. No leaves rustled except for the wind. I started walking again, slowly, keeping my eyes on the ground and around me. I didn't want to run, didn't want to attract attention if someone was nearby. The feeling of being watched returned. As I moved, I realized that the footprints around the cabin led off in two different directions. One set headed deeper into the forest, the other seemed to circle back towards the slope I had climbed. I chose the path that went back toward the slope, hoping to find the main trail from there. The forest was thick here, the light dimmer, branches scratched at my jacket and face. I kept my pace steady but cautious. Every few minutes, I heard noises, a twig snapping, a leaf rustling, something moving just out of sight. I kept telling myself it was animals or the wind, but my instincts screamed otherwise. Then, after about 20 minutes, I saw fresh footprints again. But these were different. They weren't regular hiking boots. The prints were bigger, wider, and showed heavy tread like work boots or maybe military-style boots. The prints were deeper too, as if the person was carrying something heavy. I thought about turning around, but it felt like the woods were closing in on me. I had to keep moving. The trail grew steeper again, leading up to a rocky ridge. My legs ached. My breath came faster. I stopped to take a drink and check my phone. Battery was getting low now. I felt a pang of panic. I had been out here longer than I planned. No one knew exactly where I was. I pushed on, climbing higher until I reached the ridge. The trees thinned, and I could see the tops of the forest stretching out below me. The view was beautiful, but I couldn't enjoy it. My mind was focused on getting out. I looked around for the trail. The GPS showed I was close to the main trail again, but the path was covered in loose rocks and fallen branches. I started to carefully make my way down the ridge, step by step. Suddenly, I heard voices, not yelling or shouting, just low talking, but close enough to make my skin crawl. I froze again. The voices came from below the ridge, somewhere in the thick forest. I could make out words, but only snippets, something about packing up and moving out. I realized I was near a group of people, but I had no idea who they were or if they were friendly. My heart was pounding in my ears. I didn't want to be seen or heard. I crouched behind a large rock, watching the tree line. I could see figures moving below, carrying packs and gear. They looked rough, like people who lived outside or maybe campers who didn't follow rules. Their clothes were dirty. Some had tattoos and scars. They didn't look dangerous at first, but I knew from the footprints and the hidden cabin that they weren't normal hikers. I stayed as quiet as I could and waited for them to move on. After a few minutes, the group started moving away, heading deeper into the forest. I took a deep breath and waited a little longer to make sure they were gone. When it was quiet again, I started moving carefully back down the ridge, following the GPS as best I could. The sun was beginning to set now. The sky turned orange and pink through the trees. I knew I had to find the main trail and get back to my car before dark. The forest would become even more dangerous after sunset. My legs were tired. My water was almost gone. My phone battery was almost dead, but I kept going. Finally, after what felt like hours, I saw a familiar trail marker. Relief washed over me like a wave. I was back on the main trail. I picked up my pace, stepping faster now that I felt safer. The trail was clearer, well-worn, and marked every few feet with bright orange. My name is Martin Kearns, and what I'm about to share happened to me on October 5th, 1985, deep inside the Morgan Ridge Wilderness, in the southern part of Illinois. I was 34 at the time, working a regular job in a warehouse and using weekends to go hiking to break up the dull routine. I wasn't into extreme survival stuff or anything like that. I just enjoyed the silence of the woods and the feel of the trail under my boots. That morning started off normal. The sun was out, but the air had that cold edge that hinted winter wasn't too far off. I planned to do an overnight solo hike along an old, lesser-known trail that curled through thick woods and passed by a rundown fire tower. The locals called that spot Widow's Peak, though nobody could explain where the name came from. It sounded spooky, but I didn't put much stock in stories. For the first several hours, nothing unusual happened. Dry leaves crunched underfoot, and now and then I'd hear a bird flutter off or a chipmunk dart through the brush. By noon, I'd made it several miles away from the starting point and was completely by myself, just how I liked it. But later, as the sun began to lower, I noticed things that felt off. The first thing was a set of scratch marks on a tree. They were way above my head, probably 8 feet up, and cut in deep. Too deep for any black bear I'd ever read about. I stood there for a while, looking at them and trying to figure out what kind of creature could have made those. A mountain lion? Not likely, not in this part of the country. The thought stayed with me, but I brushed it aside and kept going. An hour after that, I came across the remains of a deer, or at least what had once been one. All that was left were bones, mostly ribs, jutting upward like pale fingers, and the neck looked torn apart like something had chewed right through it. I crouched to get a closer look at the tracks in the dirt. Whatever dragged it there had large claws and seemed to have come from the east. Still, I didn't stop. I had planned to camp near the base of Widow's Peak, climb up the tower in the morning, then head back. But the woods around me had started to change. The birds and bugs went quiet, replaced by a heavy, unnatural silence. I could hear my heart thumping in my ears, the leaves under my boots, and every little branch snap behind me. By dusk, I set up camp. I forced myself to stay focused on normal stuff, putting up the tent, collecting firewood, boiling water for one of those freeze-dried meals. The stars came out, but something gnawed at me. I chalked it up to nerves. That's what I told myself, anyway. Sometime around midnight, a strange noise woke me. It was a scraping sound, low and steady, coming from just outside the tent. I held my breath, completely still, and listened hard. Then came another noise, the crunch of dry leaves, like something big stepping close. I reached for the knife I kept in my pack. It felt too small in my grip. The scraping got louder. It was getting closer. My thoughts were racing. A lost camper? Maybe a raccoon? But the shadow that stretched across the wall of the tent didn't match either of those. It was huge, and its shape didn't make sense. Without thinking too much, I threw open the zipper and jumped out, yelling loud to try and scare whatever it was. I pointed my flashlight at it and froze. What I saw wasn't like anything I'd ever come across before. It stood upright but hunched, with long arms that ended in sharp claws that caught the light. Its fur was patchy and filthy. Its head looked kind of like a wolf's, but not right, like something had pulled and stretched it too far. It growled, low and wet, and swung at me. I jumped back just in time, falling hard to the ground. My knife slipped away, landing out of reach. Came at me fast, awkward but terrifying. I scrambled to my feet and bolted, leaving everything behind. My only thought was to get to the fire tower. Maybe the metal frame and the height could protect me. I heard it crashing through the trees behind me, loud like a train tearing through the brush. I reached the tower and raced up the rusty stairs, each step groaning under me. When I was halfway up, the thing jumped, its claws scraping the metal just below my boots. I climbed faster, hands slick with sweat, until I reached the top. From the platform, I could finally see the whole creature in the moonlight. It had to be at least 8 feet tall, and its movements were strange, too smooth, almost like its joints bent the wrong way. It paced at the bottom of the tower, its claws dragging along the steel beams, making a horrible noise. I was stuck up there. No weapons, no phone, just a weak flashlight and my own panic. Then it started to climb. I tried to kick it, threw down whatever loose stuff I could find. Chunks of old wood, bolts, anything, but it kept coming. It got one arm over the edge, claws digging into the platform. There was one thing left. An old, rusted fire axe was still bolted to the inside wall. I grabbed it and swung. The blade sank into its shoulder, and it let out this horrible mix of a scream and a snarl. It stopped climbing for a second. I didn't wait. I swung again, this time hitting its chest. It lost its grip and fell. I watched it hit the ground with a terrible bone-snapping thud. I stayed up there until morning, too shaken to come down. When the sun finally rose, I climbed down slowly. The thing was still lying there, limbs twisted, not moving. Blood glistened on its fur. I didn't stick around. I got back on the trail and ran until I found a road and flagged down a truck. Later, some local rangers went out and found what was left. They never told me exactly what it was, just took my story and told me it was best I didn't come back. I haven't returned to that forest since. My name is Evan Clark, and what happened to me on August 3rd, 1999, deep inside the Red Hollow Nature Preserve in Washington, is something that will stay with me for the rest of my life. I've never been new to hiking solo. I've been doing it for over 10 years. It was my way of thinking things through, stepping away from the busyness of life, and finding a kind of quiet that nothing else gave me. But that weekend, the woods showed me a face I'd never seen before, and nothing I'd read in any book or park website could have prepared me for it. I got started early, around 5:45 a.m., hoping to finish a 20-mile loop before the sun dipped too low. The conditions were just right, cool air, with a thin haze floating low among the tall evergreens. The path wound through the hills, offering stunning views of untouched backcountry. By noon, I'd already done more than half the loop. I took a short break for water and a granola bar. I hadn't seen a single other person, which I preferred, but that quiet I usually welcomed started to feel overwhelming. At first, I noticed the stillness. The birds went silent, no bugs buzzing. Even the soft movement of leaves had faded. I brushed it off, assuming I'd just gotten lost in my own head. But then, rounding a tight curve in the trail, I saw something that made my stomach drop. A single torn hiking boot, ripped and stained, lay off to the side of the trail. I stopped and stared at it. My first thought was that someone had gotten hurt and needed help. I called out, asking if anyone was there. My voice echoed through the trees. Nothing. I stood frozen, unsure, before walking over for a closer look. The boot hadn't just been lost. It was shredded, like something strong had yanked it apart. The dark spots on it were dried blood. I thought about turning back, but the idea of leaving someone possibly injured out here didn't sit right. I kept going, looking through the woods and off the trail as I moved. Maybe 90 or 100 yards ahead, I found a backpack. Its contents were scattered water bottles, a first aid pouch, a crushed snack bag. Then I saw what made my skin crawl. Deep slash marks ran across the back panel of the pack, cut clean through the fabric. Not claw marks from any animal I knew. These were too long, too straight. Whatever had made them had claws like razor blades. Every instinct told me to run, but the feeling that something was watching me wouldn't let go. Each step I took felt slower, heavier. The trees felt like they were pushing closer together. The fog thickened, hanging on my clothes and clouding the trail ahead. That's when I heard it. A deep, steady sound, like heavy breathing, just past the next rise. I crouched down, trying to make myself as small as possible. My heart was beating so hard I could barely hear anything else. From behind a large rock, I saw it. It was upright, tall. Its body was strange, long and lean but packed with muscle, its fur ragged and patchy. Its face looked a little like a dog's, but the snout was too short. Its jaws were crammed with huge, broken-looking teeth. Its arms were long and bent strangely, ending in what looked more like twisted human hands than animal paws. It sniffed at the air and turned its head from side to side slowly. Then it crouched down and pulled something behind it. At first I thought it had a deer, but when it shifted, I clearly saw an arm. Human, limp, my breath caught, and I almost threw up. It wasn't just hunting, it was playing with its prey. I knew I had to leave. Quietly, I moved backward, careful not to step on anything loud. My plan was simple: go back the way I came, fast. But things didn't go as planned. I stepped on a patch of loose rock. The stones tumbled down the slope beside me. The creature's head jerked in my direction. It didn't move at first. It just stared, like it was sizing me up. Then it lunged, but it didn't run like a wolf. It leaped, jerky, fast, covering space in huge, unnatural strides. I ran. My legs moved faster than they ever had. The trail blurred as trees flew past, branches slashing at my face and arms. Behind me, I could hear it. Its panting breath, its snarls. It was gaining. The only thing I had going for me was knowing the trail. I veered hard to the left onto a narrow offshoot, hoping it would slow it down. I could hear trees snapping behind me. It wasn't stopping. Up ahead, I saw something, an old wooden fire watch tower. This ladder was still intact. I didn't think, I just ran for it. I jumped, grabbed the bottom rung, and started pulling myself up. The creature hit the tower's base with a crash that shook the whole frame. Its claws scraped the supports. I climbed faster, my hands sliding on the wet rungs. At the top, I reached the platform. No way out, just a 30-foot drop on every side. The thing was below, pacing, its nose pointed up, sniffing. Then it started to climb. I looked for something to fight with. A small metal box in the corner had nothing useful, just a rusty wrench. I gripped it tight. My chest was pounding as the creature's claws grabbed the edge of the platform. With a roar, it pulled itself up. Towering over me, I swung the wrench, hit its shoulder. It let out a noise, but barely reacted. It slashed at me. I dodged just in time, feeling the air from its claws pass my cheek. I hit again, this time at its head. The impact knocked it backward. It lost its grip and fell. I heard it crash into the ground. I didn't stop to look. I slid down the ladder, my hands burning, and took off toward the trail. When I reached my car, I dove in, locked the doors, and just sat there shaking. I started the engine and peeled out, my whole body buzzing with fear. In the mirror, the trees looked calm again. The fog hung over the road like nothing had happened. But I knew better. Something like that doesn't just disappear. Anywhere. My name's Darren Kellum, and what I'm about to tell happened back in October of 1985, deep in the center of Grizzly Hollow Preserve in southern Oregon. I've always been the kind of person who likes time alone, and hiking gave me space to clear my head when life felt too heavy. That weekend, I headed out by myself with just a light backpack, a small tent, some basic food, and my grandfather's old survival knife. He used to say it once saved his life from a wildcat. I never really bought that story until I had my own reason not to question it anymore. That morning was crisp, and a low mist hung at the base of the towering pines. I picked a path not many used, one that curved deeper into the forest. It wasn't on the trail maps from the information booth, but I'd overheard a couple of older folks mention it while I was having breakfast at a roadside cafe. My boots pressed down on pine needles and loose rocks, the forest around me full of birdsong and the soft sound of a stream not far off. By early afternoon, I came into a grove where the trees stood like giants, their trunks so wide and tall they shut out most of the sky. The air smelled of wet earth, fresh and musty at the same time. I sat down on a fallen tree and munched on some trail mix. That's when I noticed something wasn't right. Everything had gone quiet, not in a peaceful way. This was heavy, like the whole forest was holding its breath. Even the breeze had stopped. At first, I figured I was just imagining things. Then I saw it, about 40 yards off the trail, tucked between tall ferns and thick shadow. Something strange. It looked like a heap of stones, but as I got closer, I realized it wasn't rocks at all. It was a stack of skulls. Some looked like deer, maybe a bear, and a couple were too big to guess. I didn't stay long to study them. There was something off about how they were arranged. Too neat, like someone put them there on purpose. I turned back to the path and picked up my pace. The farther I walked, the weirder things got. I started noticing scratches on the trunks of trees, way higher than any bear or mountain lion should have been able to reach. The marks weren't random either, they formed odd shapes like symbols or drawings. My heart beat faster with every step. I thought about heading back, but the trail had twisted and split so many times that I couldn't tell which way I'd come from. Just before the sun dipped below the trees, the silence was broken by a scream. It was sharp and high, definitely a person. I froze, staring through the trees. The sound didn't come again. I stood there, thinking about what to do. Maybe someone else was out here and needed help. I couldn't just ignore that. The second scream came about an hour later, and this one wasn't human. It sounded like some kind of animal in pain, maybe a hog being butchered, but deeper and stranger. I had my flashlight on by then, the beam cutting through the thick shadows between the trunks. I looked around, but didn't see any blood or footprints. Still, the sound had come from close by, too close. I decided I'd better stop for the night. I didn't want to get more lost than I already was. I found a spot near a pile of rocks with some cover and put up my tent. I got a small fire going, just enough for some light. Around me, the woods felt too big, too dark. The fire's light cast shaky shadows on the trunks, like they were moving on their own. I ate quietly, chewing just to keep my mind off things. My ears were tuned to every little snap or rustle beyond the firelight. I must have drifted off at some point, because I woke up to the sound of something large circling the camp. My knife was in my grip before I was fully awake. The fire had burned down to orange coals, just enough to see by. I spotted a shape, huge, moving between the trees. It was tall and crouched, with limbs that were way too long and bent at angles that didn't look right. It reminded me of an ape, but thinner, like it hadn't eaten in days. The bit of skin I could see was rough and scaly, like alligator hide. It didn't walk like a normal animal. It moved quick and twitchy, like a puppet with half the strings broken. Came in closer, and that's when I saw it was carrying something. A deer, or what was left of one. Its body dangled, broken, and its head twisted the wrong way. The creature dropped the body near my fire pit and sniffed the air. This breathing sounded like rough sandpaper scraping across wood. I wanted to run, but I knew it would hear me if I did. So I didn't move, barely even breathed, just held onto the knife and hoped. It made a strange sound, a mix between a crow's caw and a hiss, and tilted its head toward me. I couldn't see its face clearly, but the way it studied me felt too smart. Suddenly it charged the tent, tearing through the fabric and poles like tissue. I rolled to the side just in time and swiped with my knife. I hit it, and it screamed. A harsh, ugly sound that didn't sound like it belonged to anything natural. Dark, sticky blood spilled from the gash. It struck back with one long arm, clipping my shoulder and throwing me down hard. The pain lit up my arm, but I got up. I grabbed a half-burned log from the fire and swung it at the thing. The ember end hit its side and sizzled on its skin. I hit it again and again. It backed off, but it wasn't retreating. It snarled and circled, looking for an opening, like a hunter playing with its food. The fight kept going, a blur of fear and instinct. I dropped my knife, but grabbed a heavy rock and brought it down on its head as it lunged. There was a loud, wet crack. It went limp, its limbs jerking a few times before it stopped moving. I didn't waste time. I grabbed my pack, what was left of it, and started moving fast, heading in what I hoped was the direction of the main trail. My arm throbbed, and my legs were close to giving out, but I didn't stop. The sun started to rise hours later, its light cutting through the trees. I stumbled out onto a ranger path and made my way to the station. The man working there, a tough-looking guy named Reams, looked at me like I was out of my mind when I told him what happened. I didn't care. I just wanted to get out of there. Later that afternoon, I went back with a group. The creature's body was still there, partially covered with leaves and branches like something had tried to bury it. Scientists, police, even wildlife officials came. None of them could explain what it was. Eventually, they took it away wrapped in a thick tarp. I never heard another word about it. I didn't ask, and I never went near those woods again. My name's Daniel, and what I'm about to describe happened to me on October 2nd, 1986, deep in the Monongahela National Forest in West Virginia. I was 28 back then, a passionate outdoorsman with a love for remote trails, the kind where the scent of pine and damp soil fills your lungs, and you can hike for hours without spotting another person. But that day, the quiet I'd always chased turned into something I'll never be able to erase. I pulled up to the start of the trail around 7:45 a.m. in my old, rusty Jeep Cherokee. The morning sun was just beginning to push through the tree cover as I locked up and headed out. I was on the Spruce Lick Loop, a winding route known for its confusing twists and dense brush. I'd walked it a few times in the past, but never on my own. My usual hiking partners had backed out, blaming packed schedules and predicted storms. I shrugged it off. The forecast looked fine, and I felt confident in my ability to handle it solo. The first stretch of the hike was peaceful. Birds chirped overhead, a distant woodpecker tapped rhythmically, and the wind drifted through the trees like a soft tune. Everything felt just as I hoped, calm and untouched. Around noon, I stopped to eat next to a stream, the water flowing fast and clean. That's when I noticed something was off. The noise around me had stopped. No birds, no rustling leaves, not even the usual buzz of insects, just dead quiet. I tried to ignore it, told myself I was imagining things. But the silence didn't feel normal, it felt wrong, like the kind of silence that presses on your skin. It gave me chills. I looked around, scanning the forest. Nothing moved, just trees and stillness. I got back up and continued walking, trying to shake the unease. By mid-afternoon, I'd made it several miles in without seeing another soul. The trail thinned and the greenery on both sides thickened until it formed almost a tunnel around me. That dead quiet still followed me like something breathing down my neck. That's when I came across the campsite. It looked abandoned. A small campfire lay cold in its stone ring, scattered with half-burned wood. One tent still stood, crooked and torn. A backpack sat on the ground nearby, half unzipped with a few items spilling out. A flashlight, a couple snack bars, and a canteen. It seemed like whoever had been there had left in a big hurry. Then I saw it, a dark patch on the dirt near the tent. Dried blood, not a huge amount, but enough to make my stomach twist. I crouched down. The smell hit me, faint, metallic. No doubt about it. Not far off, the grass was bent and the twigs snapped, like something or someone had crashed through, heading deeper into the trees. I should have turned around. I know that now, but instead I followed it. Maybe I was being reckless or just plain dumb, but something inside me said to see where it led. The trail veered away from the marked path and into a part of the forest that felt untouched by people. The trees here were older, thicker, and tangled together like they'd grown without interference for centuries. Their roots twisted through the dirt, making each step a gamble. I moved slowly, my boots crunching fallen leaves that seemed louder than they should have. I kept looking behind me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone anymore. About 30 minutes later, I found what was left of a person. It was a man, or had been. His body was torn open, his shirt soaked with blood and earth. His face was frozen in terror, eyes wide, mouth slightly open. Flies swarmed around him, but still, the forest remained silent. Not even the buzzing of the insects broke through. My stomach turned. I nearly lost the little food I'd eaten earlier. I should have run then and there, but some awful mix of curiosity and disbelief made me keep moving. I needed to understand what had done that. I grabbed the hunting knife I always carried in my pack and kept walking, now more alert than ever. The trail came to an end at a small clearing surrounded by trees so tall and thick they barely let in any light. In the center of the clearing was a pile, a grotesque mound of bones. Animal bones, yes, but some were human, mixed in. Some were picked clean. Others still had bits of skin or cloth clinging to them. I felt my breath catch. My shirt was sticking to my back with cold sweat. Then I heard it, heavy breathing. It was wet, ragged, coming from somewhere just beyond the trees at the edge of the clearing. My heart jumped. I spun around, searching the shadows. Then it stepped forward. It wasn't anything I'd ever seen before. It had to be over 7 feet tall. Its fur was patchy and dark, sticking to its skinny body. Its arms were long, spider-like, and each hand ended in claws that looked sharp enough to cut through wood. Its head looked something like a dog's long snout, twitching nose. But it didn't move like a dog. It moved like a person. Smooth, slow, predatory. I froze. My body locked up even though every part of my brain was screaming at me to run. It tilted its head as if studying me. Then it made a sound, a mix between a growl and a bark. That broke the trance. I turned and ran. I didn't care where I stepped. Branches ripped at my face and arms. The forest blurred as I tore through it. Behind me, I could hear it following, not crashing, just moving fast. Deliberate. I almost fell once, catching myself before I hit the ground. I dared to look back. It was gaining. Panic pushed me forward. I broke into another small clearing and looked around frantically. That's when I saw the fallen tree. One of its thick limbs had snapped and jutted out like a crude spear. I grabbed it, turned, and barely had time to react as the thing lunged at me. It slammed into me. I hit the ground hard. Its claws tore into my chest. The pain was white-hot. I screamed and jabbed the broken limb into its side. It let out a noise, deep, throaty, and stumbled back just long enough for me to scramble to my feet. Blood was running down my front, but the adrenaline drowned out the pain. I swung again, the branch catching it near the head. It howled and reeled back, but it wasn't down. It rushed again, claws wide. I ducked, just avoiding its swipe, and jammed the jagged wood into its gut. It shrieked. The sound bounced through the trees, thrashed, its claws raking my shoulder. But I held on, pushing the wood deeper. Finally, it went still, collapsed in a heap of twitching limbs. I stumbled away, gasping, covered in blood. Both mine and whatever that thing bled. I didn't wait. I backed away and found the trail again. Somehow, I left a streak of blood the whole way out. By the time I reached my vehicle, the sun was dipping low, stretching the shadows out across the woods. I drove as fast as I could to the closest ranger outpost. They called for an ambulance. They listened to me, wide-eyed, as I told them everything. They went back out there. The thing was still lying where I'd left it, mangled and real. It wasn't a story. It wasn't a nightmare. It happened. My name is Jonah Creel, and what I'm about to share happened on a brisk morning in late October of 1987, deep within Blue Ridge National Forest in North Carolina. I was 34 years old then, working as a builder by profession and an avid weekend hiker. I was drawn to the peace of the woods, the overwhelming feeling of being small beneath the endless canopy, the way walking long trails brought clarity to my mind in a world constantly full of noise. That morning, I set off alone along a portion of the Appalachian Trail. My wife, Carla, had pleaded with me not to go. She'd read up on some recent disappearances in the region, mostly young adults, hikers like me, but I shrugged it off. I was always a careful person and kept a fixed-blade knife on me wherever I went. Plus, I knew that section of forest better than most people know their own street. By the time midday hit, the trail had gone quiet except for the sound of my hiking boots pressing into the leaves and the soft rustling of trees in the fall wind. The scent of damp soil hung in the air, and the sun, low and golden, beamed through the treetops, casting stretched shadows that moved as I walked. I was making my way toward a hidden waterfall I'd found years back, located a few miles off the main trail, something I had stumbled upon by accident on a solo trek. When I reached the point where the trail split, I noticed something that made me pause. There were fresh footprints heading the same direction I was going, toward the falls. The prints were deep, uneven, as if the person had been dragging their feet or hauling something heavy. The odd thing was they weren't shaped like boot prints. They looked bare, toes long and spread out, similar to a dog's, but way too big to belong to any canine I'd ever seen. That's when the unease crept in, slow and cold, like a front of icy air. But still, curiosity pulled me forward. I followed the tracks. As I kept walking, something started to feel off. The sounds of birds I had heard earlier had disappeared, replaced by a crushing silence, the kind that makes your ears ring. The footprints veered off the trail and cut through a patch of thick brush. I hesitated but eventually pushed through the thorns and tangled vines, my boots snagging on roots as I went. That's when the smell hit me, strong and sickly, like a mix of rusted metal and rotting meat. I clenched the knife tighter in my hand and moved more slowly, more carefully. The tracks ended in a small clearing where the sunlight barely touched the ground. At the base of a gnarled old tree, I saw what had caused the stench. It looked like a dead animal at first, but not any kind I could name. The body was long and stretched unnaturally, its skin pulled tight over pointed bones. The head had a human shape to it, but the jaw stuck out too far. The teeth were sharp and uneven, more like those of a meat eater. Its arms and legs were thin and twisted, ending in clawed hands that had torn up the dirt as it died. His chest had been ripped open, ribs snapped outward. I stumbled back, every nerve in me telling me to run. That's when I heard something, a scraping sound against tree bark. I spun around, knife at the ready, and spotted a shadow sliding between the trees. My breath caught in my throat as it stepped into view. It looked like the thing I'd just seen, but alive, much larger. It moved on all fours, but in a stiff, clumsy way, like it wasn't used to walking that way. Its head tilted sharply as it watched me. I couldn't move. My heart pounded in my chest. For a moment, we just stood there. Then it stood up on two legs. It loomed over me, its breathing loud and uneven. I could see its chest rising, thin skin stretched over a ribcage that stuck out in sharp angles. It opened its mouth but made no sound. Still, I could feel a vibration in the air, like a signal meant just for me. A warning, a threat. I bolted. Branches slapped my face, thorns tore at my arms, but I kept running. Behind me, the creature thundered through the woods, tearing through brush like a bulldozer. I didn't dare turn around. My lungs were burning, my legs were near collapse, but I didn't stop. I gripped the knife so tightly that pain shot through my hands. I reached the main trail again, sliding on the gravel as I burst through the trees. Up ahead, I saw a hiker, young guy, maybe in his early 20s, carrying a large pack and wearing headphones. I yelled and waved like a madman. He looked puzzled and pulled out one earbud. Then the thing exploded from the woods behind me. It moved so fast, I barely had time to react. Tackled him before he could run. He let out a scream, high and terrified, but it was cut off almost instantly as the creature's claws tore into him. Blood sprayed across the trail, spattering the autumn leaves with a vivid, sickening red. I didn't stop. I didn't let myself think. I grabbed the nearest branch, a heavy one, and charged. I swung it as hard as I could, striking the beast across the back of its long skull. The branch cracked, turned to face me. Up close, it was even worse. Its skin around the mouth was torn, hanging in rough strips that showed rows of jagged, uneven teeth. It reeked of death, and its breath hit my face, warm and rotten. It swiped at me. One claw raked across my arm, and pain burst through me like fire. I staggered back, blood soaking through my sleeve, but the fear had already turned into something sharper. I grabbed my knife again and slashed at it. The blade hit its arm, cutting deep. A thick, dark fluid oozed out. The thing pulled back and made a silent, hissing motion before lunging again. I ducked, barely avoiding the claws, and stabbed the knife into its side. It thrashed violently and knocked me to the ground. I lost grip of the blade. I scrambled to my feet and snatched up the fallen hiker's trekking pole. I rammed it into the creature's neck. It let out a strange choking sound and convulsed. I pulled the pole free, and it collapsed, twitching as the dark fluid pooled around it. I didn't wait to see if it would rise again. I grabbed the hiker's backpack and took off down the trail, blood still pouring down my arm. By the time I got to the ranger station, I could barely breathe, barely speak. I gave them just enough of the story before everything went black. The rangers found the body of the creature. They found the young man too, what was left of him. The official statement blamed it on a wild animal, maybe a bear or a mountain lion. But I know better. I saw what it did. I saw what it was. They never told me what became of the remains. They never gave an explanation. But I know I'm not the only person who saw it. And whatever that thing was, it didn't belong out there. That morning had begun just like any other, following my usual pattern of loading gear and checking over supplies at the trail's start. The forest around me was quiet, damp from last night's rainfall, and the heavy scent of wet soil hung in the air. I wasn't scheduled to guide anyone, just routine maintenance work on some lesser-used paths. That plan shifted the moment an old pickup rolled into the empty gravel lot, its engine sputtering out a thin, pale man who looked like he'd stepped off a downtown sidewalk by accident. He moved stiffly as he climbed down, tall and bony, wearing layers that didn't belong together, like he'd pulled them from a donation bin without checking size or season. His skin was nearly colorless, and his deep-set eyes darted between the lot and the surrounding trees like he expected something to lunge from the underbrush. I stayed near my gear, giving him a quick nod while trying to figure out what brought him all the way out here. He came up slowly and introduced himself as Aaron, his voice cracking like it hadn't been used in days. The reservation must have slipped in after I'd already left town that morning. Not ideal, but I wasn't about to send someone away unless I had a solid reason. I'd met my share of jumpy clients. Maybe the man just needed some quiet time in the woods to clear his thoughts. We started down the trail, which curved gently at first through thick ferns and tall birches. The rain had softened the dirt, so each step gave a soft squish. I tried to make some light conversation, mentioning the weather, trail conditions, but Aaron barely responded. His replies were short, and he didn't seem interested in talking. That wasn't uncommon. Some folks preferred the woods to do the talking. An hour in, his pace started to slow. His boots dragged through the soft ground, shoulders drooping like he was carrying a burden I couldn't see. Every few steps, he'd glance back over his shoulder, eyes skimming the trees like he expected someone to appear. I've seen new hikers spooked before, especially out here where the tree cover was thick and you could go miles without catching a cell signal. But something about his glances tugged at my nerves. It wasn't panic exactly. It was like he doubted we were the only ones out there. When I suggested taking a break, he dropped onto a log covered in moss and stayed quiet. His hands shook as he pulled out a water bottle, spilling half of it down his shirt. I stood off to the side, leaning on my hiking stick, keeping an eye on him without staring. He kept looking back the way we came, his eyebrows tight. "Everything good?" I finally asked. He paused, still staring at the trees before nodding once. "Thought I heard something." "What kind of something?" He just mumbled, "Nothing. It's nothing." But his tone didn't match his words. I let it go. The woods can play tricks on your ears. Twigs breaking, birds moving through the branches. Even the wind curling around trunks in just the right way can sound strange. No need to add to his nerves. The trail narrowed as we continued, the trees pressing in closer like the forest wanted to keep us there. Aaron started lagging behind, dragging his feet. I slowed up, keeping him in view from the corner of my eye. He was muttering to himself now, low, steady, and broken. The words were hard to catch, scattered like pieces of a shattered sentence. At one point, I heard him say clearly, "Shouldn't have come, not safe." "Aaron," I said gently, keeping my voice level. "If you're not feeling good, we can turn back. There's no shame in cutting it short." He stopped. His face was tight, pinched with something I couldn't name. "It's not me," he said softly. "It's them." His words hung there, thick like fog. I opened my mouth to ask who he meant, but he was already walking again, faster now, like trying to outrun a thought. I followed, more alert than before, my senses dialing in sharper with every step. The deeper we got, the quieter the woods became. Normally, there'd be birds calling or insects buzzing, but now it felt like even the air had gone still. I looked back at Aaron. He was glancing behind him every few seconds, hand resting near a side strap on his pack like he was bracing to grab something. We came into a clearing, and I suggested we rest properly. He nodded without looking, slumping against a tree. His breathing came shallow, his fingers twitching like they couldn't stay still. I stayed near but gave him some space, eyes flicking between him and the surrounding trees. Something about the shadows seemed off. The gaps between the trunks looked deeper than they should have. I blamed the light. Sunlight through thick branches does weird things. Aaron whispered something I didn't catch, then jerked upright as a branch cracked somewhere behind us. I stood straighter, turning quickly, but saw nothing, just trees and more shadows. "You heard it," he said sharply, almost like an accusation. "Probably a raccoon," I said, though I didn't believe it much myself. He shook his head, stepping back toward the center of the clearing, his eyes darting around. "It's out there," he whispered. I started to speak but stopped when I saw his face. Eyes wide, pupils dilated, mouth slightly open in panic. He wasn't just worried. He was sure, completely certain, that something was watching him. I gripped my hiking stick tighter, scanning the woods again. There was nothing obvious, just more trees and the fading light stretching the shadows into strange shapes. Aaron stood dead center in the clearing, back turned, head jerking around like a bird tracking every noise. When I tried to meet his eyes, he wouldn't look. He just kept watching the dark. "Aaron," I said carefully, taking a step closer. "If you see something, we should figure this out together." He didn't respond. His shoulders shook beneath his oversized jacket, and he tilted his head upward, eyes trailing the tree canopy before dropping low like following something unseen. The way he stood wasn't normal, his body stiff but jittery, like every muscle was ready to snap. I crouched, pretending to check my pack, but kept one eye on him. The stillness of the clearing wrapped around us like a heavy blanket. Even the smallest sounds had vanished. Then he spun suddenly, ripping at the straps of his pack. "They're close," he hissed, his voice barely audible. "Who's close?" I asked, staying calm even though my heart was thudding. "They hate being seen, but they're here. I know they are." I looked again. The forest had gone darker since we stopped, the shadows blending into each other. Still no movement, still no sound, just silence and Aaron's trembling breath. He let out a strange chuckle that made the hair on my neck rise. "You don't see them, do you? That's the trick. You don't see unless they let you." I stayed put just far enough to react if things turned. "Aaron, we need to go. We'll head back to the start, figure out what's going on." "No, too late," he whispered. "We're too far. It's already." His sentence cut off as his gaze snapped to something behind me. I froze, every hair on my arms rising. I slowly turned, expecting empty forest, but the clearing felt different now, like the tree line had crept closer when I wasn't looking. Aaron darted past me, grabbing a thick stick off the ground and holding it like a bat. His eyes flicked back and forth, wild. His breathing was erratic now. "You have to go," he said, shaking. "They only want me." I kept my hands out, calm. "Okay, Aaron, I'm trying to understand." "They already took the rest," he shouted, swinging the branch toward the shadows. "You don't get it." I moved closer, trying to stay composed. "Okay, you're right, I don't get it, but I want to." His face contorted, veins bulging, knuckles white around the stick. For a second, I thought he'd strike me, but instead, he dropped the branch and sank to his knees, grabbing his head. "They never leave," he murmured. "Once they see you." A cold ripple passed through me. Whatever he was experiencing, he needed help. Real help. Not something I could offer out here. I knelt beside him, speaking low and calm. "We'll figure it out, but we need to move. It's getting late. We can't be out here in the dark." Aaron lifted his head, eyes meeting mine. For 1 second, they were clear, really clear, like he was finally seeing me. Then his face twisted, and he lunged. The hit knocked me back hard. His fingers clawed at my jacket, gripping my shoulders like a lifeline. He screamed, "It's you! It's you!" I struggled, pushing with everything I had to get him off me. "Aaron, stop!" The lane grew tighter as the forest closed in, the thick trunks of the trees standing like old guards. Gravel popped under the tires, each dip in the road sending a jolt through our gear in the back. Kayla sat next to me, absently thumbing through her phone, even though we'd lost service a long way back. A wrinkled map sat in her lap, the edges soggy from being jammed into the door pocket earlier. "This is it," I said, giving the GPS a final glance just before the screen froze for good. The marker for the Shadow Ridge trailhead was nothing more than a beat-up piece of wood nailed to a tree, mostly hidden under a thick patch of moss. Could have been anything. A joke, a decoy, but the directions and map lined up. Kayla tossed her phone into the bag at her feet and leaned forward, peering into the trees like she expected to see something specific. "Feels deserted out here," she muttered. "That's the point, isn't it?" I tried to sound laid back, but the quiet in the woods made my hands clench tighter around the steering wheel. We passed an old camper awkwardly parked along the shoulder. Its paint was flaking, and one of the windows had duct tape across the cracks. Two people stood outside it, both tall, both completely still. The guy wore ripped-up jeans and a stretched-out tank top. The woman had no shoes on and held what looked like a cup. Neither of them waved or smiled. They didn't move at all. They just watched us. I gave a small nod, half a greeting, half an instinct, and kept driving. Kayla sat up a little straighter but didn't say anything until we'd gone a good distance. "They looked like they were waiting for something," she said. "Yeah, maybe waiting for someone to give them a bar of soap," I said, trying to joke. She didn't laugh. In the rear view, the camper got smaller, but the two figures remained in view, standing perfectly still through the swirling dust. Not long after that, the trail came into view. It opened up just enough to squeeze in two cars, though we were the only ones there. I parked beneath a sagging branch and turned off the car. The silence that settled around us was immediate and deep. No traffic, no electric hum, no birdsong, just the occasional rustling of leaves high above. Kayla stepped out and stretched, while I went around back to grab our packs. She was already lacing her boots when I swung my bag over my shoulder. "We should get moving," she said. "It's a long walk." The start of the trail looked untouched. The ground was smooth, no footprints, no tire marks besides our own. A worn wooden sign marked the beginning of the Shadow Ridge Trail. The letters were barely legible beneath layers of grime. I caught a faint scent, like wet ash and old logs, as we stepped into the trees. The first part of the walk was uneventful, though the trees felt unusually close. Their roots curled up through the trail, like they were reaching out to grab anyone who came through. Kayla walked ahead, snapping pictures every so often. The click of her camera was the only sound. "Check this out," she said, pointing at a tree with deep gashes cut into its bark. "Bare scratches," I said, though they didn't look right, too clean, too intentional. I snapped a photo with my phone and we moved on. Around the halfway mark, the forest got thicker. The light dimmed, even though the sun was still shining somewhere above. Kayla stopped taking photos, her pace slowing as we climbed a thin slope. The air felt heavy here. Every step sounded too loud. "You hear that?" she said, suddenly stopping. I stopped too and listened hard, but I heard nothing. No birds, no breeze, not even insects. Just silence, like the woods were holding their breath. "Maybe it's just a quiet patch," I said, though I found myself glancing behind us more often after that. The cabin appeared just as my legs started to complain. It was smaller than I thought it'd be, tucked away in a clearing with no clear trail leading up to it. The wood was faded and worn, the corners softened by time. A rusted axe was stuck in a chopping stump near a fire ring surrounded by broken wood pieces. "Home sweet home," Kayla said, but her voice didn't sound excited. We checked the place out quickly. One room, a bunk along one wall, a small stove in a corner, a table layered in dust. No sign that anyone had been there recently. I figured that was a good thing. We decided to camp outside instead of sleeping in the dark, stuffy cabin. We made a small fire as the woods closed in tighter. The shadows stretched longer than they should have, and the quiet pressed in heavier. Even the crackling fire seemed too quiet. Kayla sat close to the flames, her knees tucked under her chin. "What do you think's out here?" she asked, her voice low. "Probably just deer and raccoons," I said, though I made sure the axe was always within reach. Once the fire burned down to red embers, we moved inside. The old wooden bed creaked beneath us as we settled in. Outside, the woods were still and silent again. I don't know why, but I slid the wooden latch on the door before we lay down. It wasn't much, but it made me feel a bit better. I woke up sometime later, deep in the night. The fire was long dead. At first, I thought I'd heard Kayla shifting on the bunk, but she lay still, her breathing slow. Then it came again. A sound, barely a sound, something like light tapping. Not from inside, from just outside the cabin wall. I tried to brush it off. Maybe a twig moving in the breeze. Maybe some small animal sniffing around. But it didn't stop. Kayla stirred beside me. Her eyes opened slowly. "What is that?" she whispered. "Probably an animal," I said, though I didn't buy it myself. "Animals don't knock." The tapping changed. More defined now. Something firm knocking on wood. It echoed through the stillness, slow, even, and planned. I sat up and moved quietly to the window. The glass was fogged from our breath, and beyond it was only black. Whatever was out there was just beyond the reach of the lantern's glow. Kayla sat up, wrapping herself in the blanket. "Don't go out there," she said, not asking, telling. I paused. Every part of me wanted to ignore it, but I grabbed the flashlight and the small knife I'd brought for firewood. It wasn't much, but it made me feel less exposed. When I eased the door open, cold air rushed in like a slap. I aimed the flashlight out into the dark. The woodpile was undisturbed, the fire ring cold and silent. Then the noise came again, closer this time, from behind the cabin. I turned slowly. The beam landed on the chopping stump. The axe was gone. I stood frozen, scanning the dirt. A thin line of turned earth led into the trees. It wasn't messy like an animal trail. It was neat, controlled, like it had been pulled. Kayla appeared behind me. "What is it?" she whispered. "The axe," I said, pointing. She said nothing. She didn't need to. I shut the door fast and bolted it. The latch wouldn't stop anything determined, but it was all we had. Kayla sat down at the table, staring at her hands. I turned off the lantern. The dark felt safer, like it might hide us. The knocking didn't return. Instead came a different sound, something dragging across the ground. It was quiet at first, a soft scrape, but it came again and again, closer each time. I pictured the axe blade being dragged, leaving thin grooves behind it. Then it stopped. We sat frozen in the pitch dark. Neither of us moved. Time dragged. Minutes? Hours? Couldn't tell. The silence got so thick it felt like it had weight. Then we heard it. Laughter. Not loud, not close, but there. Low and twisted. A weird, broken laugh. Like someone trying to fake joy but getting it wrong. It made my skin crawl. Kayla whispered, "That's not an animal." I didn't answer. What was I supposed to say? The laugh stretched into a warped tune, then vanished. I thought that was the end of it. But then we heard footsteps. Slow, purposeful, heavy. Each one crunching twigs and leaves just outside. It stopped beside the wall. I waited, thinking it might try the door. But it didn't. It just stayed. Neither of us slept. We stayed curled up on the bunk, waiting for morning light to leak through the cabin's cracks. Every pop of the wood, every sigh of wind made us flinch. But the door never opened. The laughter didn't come back. When the sun finally rose, I stepped outside. The axe was still missing. The line in the dirt led away into the trees, vanishing into the shadows. But that's not what stopped me. The word "run" had been carved into the outside wall of the cabin. The letters were deep, jagged, fresh, and below them, the ground was scattered with There's something about returning to where you grew up that makes everything seem smaller. The roads, the trees, even the sky. It all feels like it's been through the dryer and came out just a bit shrunken and strange. That's what it was like driving back to Redfield. It had been nearly 10 years since I'd last set foot there, and even though I could recall every cracked road and drooping power line, it felt like I was staring at an old photo, familiar, yet not quite right. Josh was the reason for the visit. We'd kept in touch over the years, the occasional birthday call, a postcard during the holidays, but life had tugged us down separate paths. So when he mentioned he'd be around for a week, we made plans to make the most of it. Simple plans. Revisit some memories, drink more than we should, and act like we weren't two guys inching toward 40. The first few nights were easy. We sat in his parents' backyard, beers in hand, swapping tales that had been told so many times they'd lost all sharp edges. Most of them were about the woods. As kids, we had practically lived out there. His family's land bordered a huge stretch of forest, and every weekend I'd bike over with my secondhand camping gear, ready to vanish until Sunday evening. We built forts, caught little crayfish, and acted like we were explorers discovering new land. It was freedom in its rawest form. Eventually, the nostalgia turned into a dare. "We should head back out," Josh said, voice low like he was telling a secret. He leaned back in his chair, the fire casting flickers of light on his face. "One last trip." I laughed and shook my head. We weren't 14 anymore. We'd probably throw our backs out trying to hang a hammock. "No tents," he said. "Just hammocks like before. It's just one night. What could go wrong?" It was the same kind of thinking that had always landed us in messes as kids, and it worked just as well now. The plan was made. One night, one hike. We'd follow the old train tracks, but this time we'd go west, somewhere we'd never explored. Josh called it discovering the unfamiliar. I called it a bad idea, but I said yes. The morning of the trip, my wife, Megan, drove us to the old drop-off spot we used to frequent. She rolled her eyes in exaggerated disbelief as we unloaded our stuff. "You two are ridiculous," she said, leaning out the car window. "Just don't come back limping." "Yes, ma'am," Josh grinned. She drove off, leaving us standing on the shoulder of the gravel road. The tracks stretched ahead, rusted and covered in growth. The woods framed them like a tunnel, and for a moment it was easy to pretend we were kids again, about to begin some big journey. Josh clapped me on the back. "Ready." The day passed easily enough. The tracks looked the same, quiet and bordered by dense woods, with trees so thick the sky barely peeked through. We paused here and there, poking around at old bridges and forgotten clearings, joking about how out of shape we'd become. Occasionally we'd hear a rustle in the brush, but it was the kind of sound you get used to after years in the forest. As the sun dipped lower, the tracks guided us into a denser stretch of woods. The trees here were older, their branches twisting like fingers. The light was dim, and everything had a bluish-gray tone. Josh walked a few steps ahead, humming a tune I didn't recognize, when I noticed how quiet it had gotten. Not peaceful quiet, heavy quiet. Even Josh stopped humming, the sound trailing off halfway. "Feels like we're in the middle of nowhere," he said too loudly. "That's kind of the idea," I replied. We set up camp just off the tracks in a small clearing surrounded by crooked trees. Josh hung his hammock while I gathered firewood. The ground was soft, covered with layers of old leaves, and the air smelled damp, like a storm waiting to happen. It should have been peaceful, but something about the clearing put me on edge. Maybe it was the way the trees leaned inward, like they were closing in. We ate in near silence, the shadows growing longer. Eventually, Josh asked if I thought we'd find anything interesting the next day. I shrugged. Probably more trees. Maybe an old bridge. He nodded and poked at the fire. "Feels weird out here," he said. I didn't answer. He had said exactly what I was thinking. The woods didn't feel the same. Or maybe we weren't the same. That sense of freedom we chased as boys was missing. What was there now was quieter, slower, something that lingered just outside the light of the fire. When we climbed into our hammocks, the fire was little more than a soft glow. The forest around us was thick and endless. I told myself that tomorrow would be different. We'd laugh about being so jumpy. But as I stared up at the black canopy, I kept thinking about Megan's words. Maybe we were being dumb. Maybe this really was a mistake. I didn't say anything to Josh. He wouldn't have wanted to hear it. I didn't either. The morning came slowly. I don't think I actually slept, just drifted in a light fog, aware of every sound around me. Josh stirred first, letting out a groan as he stretched. "Coffee?" he asked, rubbing his face. We had none. Just a few energy bars and water, which we ate quietly while the forest woke up. The trees didn't seem as intimidating in daylight, but the shadows were still darker than they should have been. Josh was chipper, cracking jokes about how soft we'd become since our youth. I laughed, but my mind stayed on the tracks. We packed up quickly and got moving. The tracks stretched like an old scar, the rails bent and nearly hidden by weeds. It felt like no one had been through here in decades. The sun climbed, and for a while everything felt normal. Josh began humming again, some slightly off-pitch tune I almost recognized. It echoed softly between the trees. Then the woods started to change. The trees got taller and crowded tighter, their branches weaving overhead like tangled cables. The air turned thick with the scent of wet soil and something faintly metallic. The ground grew uneven, chunks of rail poking up at strange angles. I tripped more than once. Josh fell silent. We were coming around a bend when the tracks opened into a clearing. It wasn't big, just a break in the trees where pale sunlight filtered through. But in the center was something we hadn't expected. A structure, or the remains of one. It looked ancient. Stone walls covered in moss, with vines threading through the cracks. Part of the roof had caved in, beams sticking out like broken bones. There were no real windows, only slits that could have been for light or arrows. It was small, maybe 20 feet across, but it felt wrong. Too solid, too purposeful. "Is that a chapel?" Josh asked quietly. "Maybe," I said, though it didn't feel right. Chapels usually have a peaceful feel. This didn't. We approached it not because we wanted to, but because standing still felt worse. The smell hit us partway there. Not rot, but something sharp, metallic, and wet wood. I looked at Josh, but he was already stepping inside what had once been a doorway. "Josh!" I called. He didn't stop. Inside, it was dark. The floor was scattered with wood shards, stone bits, and pieces of pottery. The walls had carvings, odd shapes like stick figures stretched and distorted. Circles overlapped with jagged edges. "Who would build this out here?" Josh asked, running his hand over a carving. "No one sane," I muttered. The air was cool, but not in a refreshing way. It clung to the skin. Josh knelt and brushed away leaves, uncovering what looked like bone. "Too small to be human. Animal?" he asked, holding it up. "Probably," I said, but I wasn't sure. I didn't want to be. "Creepy," Josh said, dropping it. "Let's go before we find something worse." I didn't argue. We stepped out and I realized I'd been holding my breath. Josh tried to laugh it off. "Bet this place has wild ghost tales." But the joke didn't land. The trees around the structure looked darker, the clearing's light not reaching them. I didn't want to turn my back on it, but we did. We made camp again before sunset, farther from the tracks in a thinner patch of forest. Josh opened a snack bag and told a story about a college fling. I pretended to listen. My eyes kept wandering to the tracks, toward that place. Night came fast. Darkness swallowed the last light. Josh fell asleep quickly in his hammock. I stayed up, staring at the fire, listening. Somewhere nearby, a branch cracked. Then another. It wasn't random. It was steady. I didn't wake Josh. Not yet. I lay there watching the fire fade, waiting. The fire had gone out hours before. Only faint embers remained. I hadn't slept. Every noise, every shift of leaves, every movement in the dark was louder than it should have been. My hammock creaked slightly as I shifted, gripping the edge like I might need to jump. Josh was still snoring softly. Since my name is Brandon, and what I'm about to share happened to me on September 18th, 1985, deep in the Rockland National Forest in northern West Virginia. I was 29 years old, a dedicated outdoorsman who was drawn to quiet trails where the scent of pine filled the air and you could walk for hours without running into a single other person. But that day, the isolation I usually enjoyed turned into something I'll never be able to forget. I had pulled my old Jeep Cherokee into the gravel lot at the start of the trail a little after 7:30 in the morning. The woods were slowly waking up beneath the rising sun. I had picked the Hollow Creek Loop, a route known for its winding trail and dense greenery. I'd walked it before, but never on my own. The friends I usually hiked with had all dropped out. One had work, the other said the weather looked iffy. I brushed off their excuses. The forecast looked clear, and I had faith in my experience. The first few miles were calm, peaceful even. Birds chirped above, a squirrel darted across the path, and a breeze moved through the tree limbs like a soft tune. By around noon, I found a spot by a narrow stream to eat my lunch. The water was cold and clear, and I knelt down to refill my bottle. That's when I first noticed something off. The woods had gone completely quiet. No birdsong, no rustling brush, not even the sound of flies. I tried telling myself it was nothing, but something about it didn't sit right. The silence wasn't peaceful anymore. It felt wrong, like the air had thickened. A chill crawled up my back as I looked around, hoping to catch a glimpse of anything moving. There was nothing, just stillness, like the trees were watching. I shook it off and kept moving. By the middle of the afternoon, I was deep in the woods and hadn't passed a single person all day. The trail had narrowed, the surrounding brush thick and wild, closing in on both sides. The quiet hadn't left. It clung to me like something heavy I couldn't shake. That's when I found the camp. It was deserted. The fire ring had gone cold, blackened logs scattered around it. A single tent stood crooked, with its side torn open. A backpack sat on the ground, its zipper half open, with stuff spilling out. An old flashlight, a crushed water bottle, a couple of granola bars. It looked like whoever had been there had taken off fast, like they didn't have time to pack up. Then I saw the blood. A dark stain, dried into the dirt just beside the tent. It wasn't a large pool, but it was enough to make my stomach tighten. I knelt down and leaned closer. The smell was faint, but clear, metallic, and sharp. Right near it, there was a path of trampled plants and snapped twigs leading away into the thicker woods. My first thought was to turn back, to forget I ever saw it. But my curiosity, or maybe my own stupidity, pushed me to keep going. I started to follow the trail. The deeper I walked, the worse I felt. The path led me off the main route, into a part of the forest I didn't recognize. The trees here grew closer together, their limbs twisted, their roots like traps waiting to catch a careless step. I moved slower, more careful. Each time my boot hit the ground, it sounded too loud. I kept glancing behind me, certain I wasn't alone. I came across the body after maybe 30 minutes. It was a man, at least it had been. His torso was ripped open. His clothes were soaked in blood and packed with dirt. His mouth hung open, frozen in a look of horror. His eyes stared wide at nothing. Flies buzzed over him, but the forest was still quiet as death. My stomach turned, and I had to fight the urge to throw up. I should have left. I should have turned around and run for my life. But something made me stay. I needed to know what did this. I pulled the hunting knife from my belt, holding it tight in my hand, and moved forward. The trail ended in a small open area surrounded by trees that blocked most of the light. In the center was a pile of bones. Animal bones, human bones, all jumbled together. Some were picked clean, others still had bits of flesh clinging to them. My throat tightened, sweat ran cold down my spine. Then I heard it, a slow, ragged breathing, wet and heavy. It was coming from the trees beyond the clearing. I spun around, heart pounding, eyes scanning the darkness. Then it came into view. It wasn't like anything I'd ever seen. It stood tall, at least 7 feet, and was covered in dirty fur clinging to a thin, wiry body. Its arms were long and thin, too long, and ended in claws that looked sharp enough to tear through bone. Its face looked part dog, part something else. Its snout sniffing at the air, its eyes small and black. It moved toward me with smooth, almost silent steps, each one slow and purposeful. My body wouldn't move. I just stood there, frozen. The thing tilted its head, like it was studying me. Then it made a sound, something between a growl and a choking bark, that snapped me out of it. I turned and ran. I didn't care where I was going. I just charged through the brush, branches ripping at my arms and face. I could hear it behind me, those footsteps pounding the earth, closing in. The forest rushed by in a blur. I stumbled once, catching myself just in time. I risked a glance back. It was closer now. Those long limbs moved it like a spider, fast and smooth. I looked around, desperate. There was a downed tree nearby, one of its broken limbs sharp like a spear. I grabbed it. The second I turned, it lunged at me. We crashed to the ground. Its claws raked across my chest. I screamed, the pain hot and blinding, but I swung the branch hard into its side. It let out a snarl and jumped back, giving me enough time to scramble to my feet. My shirt was soaked with blood. I didn't care. I raised the branch again and slammed it into the side of its face. The wood cracked, and the thing let out a terrible sound, half roar, half scream. It stumbled, then it rushed me again. I ducked, barely dodging its claws. I drove the broken end of the branch into its gut with everything I had. It howled loud enough to shake the trees. It flailed, slicing my shoulder, but I held tight and pushed the wood deeper. It finally collapsed. Its arms twitched once, then it didn't move. I backed away, barely able to breathe. I was shaking all over. Blood dripped from my arms and chest, soaking into the dirt. I didn't wait to see if it was really dead. I turned and stumbled away, back the way I came, leaving a trail of blood behind me. The pain was bad, but the fear was worse. By the time I made it to my Jeep, the sky was orange, and shadows stretched long across the forest floor. I drove straight to the nearest ranger station. They called an ambulance and listened to my story without interrupting, their faces pale. When they went out to investigate, the body of that thing was still there, twisted, real, proof I hadn't imagined any of it. My name is Jared Riles, and what I'm about to tell you happened to me on a chilly morning in late October of 1984, deep within the Blue Ridge Mountains in North Carolina. I was 34 at the time, working as a self-employed builder, and on the weekends I liked to lose myself in nature. Hiking was my way to reset. I enjoyed the quiet of the wilderness, how small I felt beneath those towering trees, and how wandering along old paths cleared my mind from the clutter of everyday life. That morning, I set out alone on a stretch of the Appalachian Trail. My wife, Dana, had begged me not to go. She'd read something in the paper about a few people going missing in that part of the state. Mostly younger hikers, folks like me, but I brushed it off. I was always the careful type, kept a blade on me anytime I went into the woods. And more than that, I knew those trails well. I'd been through that area more times than I could count. By midday, everything was quiet around me. The only sounds were the crunching of leaves under my shoes and the occasional whisper of the breeze through the trees. The smell of damp forest floor lingered in the air, and the sun, hanging low already, sent streaks of light through the canopy that made long moving shadows at my feet. I was heading toward a little-known waterfall off the main trail, a hidden spot I'd found years ago and kept to myself ever since. When I reached the fork that led there, I noticed something odd. Fresh tracks in the dirt. They went the same direction I was heading, toward the falls. But these weren't normal footprints. They were deep, scattered like the person had trouble walking or was pulling something heavy. And they weren't boot prints. They were bare. Long toes spread wide like a dog's. But they were far too large to belong to any animal I knew. That's when the uneasy feeling started, like a draft of cold wind slipping down the back of your neck. Still, curiosity got the better of me. I followed the trail. The deeper I went, the stranger things felt. The usual bird chatter had stopped entirely. In its place was a thick, unnatural silence, one that made your ears feel like they needed to pop. The footprints veered off the trail into a patch of thick brush. I paused, then pushed in, branches tugging at my clothes, thorns scratching my legs. Then I caught a smell, something sharp and rotten, like rusty metal mixed with something long dead. I gripped my knife tighter and moved slower, every step deliberate. The tracks led me into a small clearing where sunlight barely touched the ground. And that's when I saw what had caused the stench. At first, I thought it was a dead animal. But as I got closer, I knew it wasn't anything I'd ever seen. The shape of the body was wrong. It was long skin stretched thin over hard, sharp bones. The face had human-like features, but the jaw was too big, the teeth crooked and mismatched like they belonged to a wild predator. Its limbs were thin and long, ending in clawed hands that had clearly torn up the earth around it before it died. The chest was torn open, ribs split and bent outward like broken branches. I stepped back fast, every instinct screaming to turn around and run. That's when I heard it. A dry, scraping sound like nails dragging along tree bark. I turned, knife in hand, and saw a shadow shift through the trees. Came into view slowly. It looked like the thing I'd just seen, but alive. And it was much bigger. It moved on all fours, but not naturally. Its motions were jerky and awkward, like it was trying to move in a way it wasn't meant to. Its head tilted at a strange angle as it watched me. I stood frozen. My heart was pounding in my chest. For several seconds, neither of us moved. Then it rose up onto two legs, towering over me. Its chest heaved with raspy breaths, ribs sticking out beneath skin like old leather stretched too tight. It opened its mouth, and even though no sound came out, I felt something in the air, a heavy, vibrating pressure, a threat. I turned and ran. Branches smacked against my face, thorns cut my arms, but I didn't slow down. Behind me, I heard it charging. The sound of it crashing through the woods was thunderous, like a truck tearing through brush. I didn't dare look back. My lungs burned. My legs screamed, but I kept going, gripping my knife so hard my fingers hurt. When I burst back onto the main trail, my boots skidded across the loose gravel. Up ahead, I saw another hiker, a young man, maybe 21, headphones in, walking slow. I shouted, waving my arms like a lunatic. He looked up, confused, just as the creature exploded from the tree line behind me. It was on him before either of us could react. The kid screamed, sharp and terrified, but it was cut short. The thing's claws tore into him, blood splattering across the trail, soaking the red and gold leaves in wet crimson. I didn't think. I didn't feel. I just acted. I grabbed the nearest fallen limb, thick and solid, and ran at it, swinging with everything I had. The branch cracked against the back of its skull. It whirled on me, snarling soundlessly. Close, its face was even worse. The skin around its mouth was ripped in places, flapping open and showing those uneven, dirty teeth. Its breath was warm and smelled like something that had been dead for days. It lashed out, and one of its claws caught my arm, ripping a line of fire down it. Blood poured out, soaking through my shirt, but I barely noticed. I swung the knife at its arm and sliced deep, thick dark ooze leaking from the wound. It jerked back, then lunged again. I ducked, barely missing its claws, and drove my knife into its side. It thrashed wildly, knocking me off my feet, and I lost my grip on the blade. Scrambling up, I grabbed the hiker's dropped walking stick and jammed it into the creature's neck. It let out a sound that didn't make sense, half a gasp, half a gurgle. Its body spasmed, and I pulled the stick out as it dropped to the ground, twitching in a dark puddle of its own blood. I didn't hang around. I grabbed the young man's pack and ran, my injured arm throbbing with each step. By the time I reached the ranger station, I was barely standing, only able to choke out pieces of what had happened before I blacked out. The rangers found it. They found what was left of the kid, too. The official write-up said it was a wild animal attack. A cougar, they claimed, or maybe a bear. But I know what I saw. That thing wasn't anything you'd find in a guidebook. They never told me what happened to the remains, never gave me a real explanation. But I'm not the only one who saw it, and I know that what we found out there didn't belong.